Thank you everybody for joining us. Today is September 16th, 2025. We are here for the purposes of a public board business meeting. I want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. I also want to give another welcome to Annie Romano, who is our new board member who will be joining us for her first full board meeting. So thank you, Annie, for taking on the commitment.
Thank you.
I also want to just make some welcome announcements to some of our folks in the audience from our classified associations groups. We have Buildings and Grounds, President Leo Campo. For Child Nutrition, we have President Tanya Slaughter. From Transportation, we have Audrey Benali. With SLEA, Salt Lake Education Association, we've got President Mike Harmon and Vice President Chelsea Acosta. Thank you for joining us as always. With the Salt Lake Association of School Administrators, they're represented by Tom Luthi, who's the principal over at North Star, and they are represented tonight by Nicole Palmer. I see you back there. Thank you, Nicole, for joining us this evening as well, representing SLASA. With that, we'll go ahead and move on.
Point of information.
Yes.
Tom Luthi is the assistant principal at West High.
Oh my gosh, I totally messed that up. I'm sorry. Thank you. Sorry, Tom. Moving on, we have our Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll go ahead and lead us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you for joining me in the pledge. Up next, we have our recognition. We're really excited to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month with a performance that Emma from our communications team is going to introduce to us. Emma, thank you.
Hello and good evening, board members. We're so excited to have with us tonight the Folklorico Dance Group from Northwest Middle School to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month with us. Thank you so much for sharing your talent and passion with us tonight. Here's a little bit about them. In 2022, Northwest launched its very own Folklorico Dance Group under the direction of Jessica Thompson. Among the first students to join were Jaden Camarena and Jasmine Sarato, whose passion for Folklorico only grew stronger. Even after moving on to West High School, both students continued to dance and deepen their connection to this beautiful tradition. Jasmine in particular has dedicated countless hours to practicing and choreographing her own dances. She even traveled to Mexico to purchase an authentic folklorico outfit, including the traditional shoes, so she could fully embrace the art form. Last year, Jasmine reached out to Northwest with a heartfelt request to choreograph a dance for their 2025 celebration of Northwest. She has since spent many hours teaching and mentoring the dancers you'll see on stage today, sharing not just steps, but the cultural significance behind each movement. Tonight, they will present La Negra, choreographed by Jasmine Sarato and performed by a group of talented Northwest students. Please join us in celebrating their hard work, dedication, and vibrant spirit. Enjoy the performance.
All right, Northwest students, thank you so much. Let's give them another round of applause. It's always great to have our students sharing their talents and their heritage with us, so thank you for all of us for participating in that. I know it means a lot, and congratulations, Ms. Seminario. There's a wonderful group of students at your school. Moving on to our consent agenda, I will entertain a motion.
I make a motion to move the consent agenda as posted to the action agenda.
Second.
So you want to move the whole consent agenda to the action?
I'm sorry, just
You wanna
approve it. I screwed it up.
You want to restate your motion?
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda as posted.
Second.
Perfect. We got a motion, a second on the table. Any discussion?
I have a question.
Please.
So regarding Exhibit 3B1A, the Salt Lake City Police Department contract and purchasing, I have a request or a question regarding whether we have any data or outcome evaluations on the effectiveness of this program.
So let's turn to Dr. Lisan Taylor, who works with our SROs and is our police department liaison, actually, so.
Oh, that's new.
Yeah, well, I'm describing a role rather than giving you a new one.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. In terms of causation or correlation, we have not amassed data to support that, but what we do have is we can pass on data that shows the number of instances and the kids who have flowed through this program. So, and that's one thing that we can look at in terms of the future.
Okay, so currently, if I'm understanding correctly, you just have the basic measures of data of kids going through the program, but in the future, you could include an outcome evaluation trying to evaluate the effectiveness of the tools being used.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Do you have any other questions?
no, that's my only question.
Okay.
Any other discussion or questions regarding the consent agenda items? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and start with a roll call vote with Board Member Williams.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Charlotte Fife Jefferson, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Annie Romano, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Amanda Longo, yes.
All right, that motion passes. Thank you, board members. Moving on to our request to speak, we did not have anybody sign up for our request to speak, so we'll go right into our reports agenda, which is the update on construction progress. So this was a request that was made from board members to Dr. Grant and board leadership about having more consistent updates regarding our high school rebuild. So Isaac, I see you walking up. The floor is yours.
Good evening, and thank you. I provided a letter that I don't want to go over again, so I'll just hit a couple of highlights for you. Work is underway on the temporary fields for West High School. A key request from the community has been, West High, we've been working on the Glendale track and field and the city partnership for the baseball and softball field. Both of them are underway. We actually worked with SLEF to reach out to the community. We had a community meeting a couple weeks ago to show them the plans and get their input for that facility. Based off of that, the only input, well, the main input they said was that they would like to see lights on that field similar to what Roslyn Heights has. With it being a west side facility and it having turf fields to allow for times after daylight savings. Again, with SLEF, they had agreed to helping raise money for the Glendale track, and they have recently set their ad hoc committee together, and they've set out some agendas and plans. They've been waiting for us to provide actual detailed drawings so they can use those to print out and take those to potential sponsors and share those ideas with them. Initially, there was not a set amount of what they were going to raise for. The discussion has been somewhere in the $600,000 range, but that has not been set. An actual dollar amount hasn't been set for that yet, but that's part of the ad hoc committee and the Salt Lake Education Foundation that will be doing that in partnership with the Ron McBride Foundation. As far as the baseball and softball fields at Rosewood Park, those projects are underway. We completed the agreement with the city, and it's going through the recording process, but we have an agreement to start the work so we can get the infield torn up and replanted this fall, so it'll be ready for spring ball next year. The Highland fields, those are obviously, we've talked about that those will happen next year. I'm excited to tell you that Wasatch Tunnel, we're about 90% complete on that. Really, it's just some small projects on the outside, cleaning up the grounds and getting things reset for that, and then also installing some frames inside the tunnel so they'll be able to hang artwork and change that out, and people won't be able to mess with it. And then the high school rebuilds and community input that we've received recently, want you to be aware that we are setting up several meetings with the city and other elected officials to talk about those concerns. Those are scheduled for the 23rd and 30th of this month. So hopefully after those meetings we'll be able to share additional information with the community and with everyone involved. I do want to say that we're appreciative of the input. It is difficult for a lot of people to understand the processes that have happened up to this point, but we appreciate the input and we'll do everything we can to try and accommodate as much as possible.
Thank you, Isaac. Are there any questions for Isaac? Amanda, and then Ashley, and then Charlotte. And Brian.
I guess one, just great job, and then question, but I just wanted to point out like the Highland Park Elementary lot that was repoured and redone. I'm there regularly, and it's substantial improvement as to what it was, so just want to say that it's recognized and seen. And then it was nice to see that with that repour of the sidewalks, there was a part that was actually quite hazardous that we'd have to get salt to make sure people weren't slipping and falling. And that was phenomenal to see that that was restructured to hopefully mitigate those injuries. So thank you. And then you were talking about somebody wanting lights on a field like Roslyn Heights. Was it the Glendale track and?
Yes, I'm sorry, the Glendale track and field, they were requesting that there be lights on the lacrosse soccer area of that. That was the community input from that meeting.
Okay, so it was community, because I would just say, recommend, as you've been hearing on the Roslyn Heights site, one of the concerns that hasn't been as expressive as to others, but the lights has been a concern that was expressed. So I'm curious with the lights at Roslyn Heights or wherever else they're going to be, I would presume there's a capability like in any home that if they were putting up 10 bulbs and it's too bright for the community, then they can take down a few bulbs to make it not so bright? Is there that capacity with these
It-
poles?
It's not as simple as that, but they are directional LEDs, and there is a way to dim them a little bit. But there's certain ratings that it's required to, the candle measurement on the field is required for the play. Otherwise, it causes some glare or not being able to see that coming at you. But again, we'll work with the community to make sure that they're aware of it beforehand, that we do the tests and make sure that because we haven't done the final directional test up at Roslyn yet. We'll be doing that here pretty quick make sure the community knows that's happening after dark, and they'll have plenty of time to know about that, and it'll be 25, 30 minutes after dark that we test those and get those set. But it's not as easy as just pulling a bulb out, but yes, there are ways that we can mitigate some of those concerns.
And I think that would be good to communicate to the community is, even if it's not as easy, there are ways, because there's obviously a lot of strong concern if you're in your backyard and you want it to be a dark night and you're lit up like the 4th of July.
And I mean, the other agreement that we have made with Roslyn Heights, and I assume we would do the same with everyone else, is that we would set standard times and we would enforce those stringently, so we don't have issues at, after normal hours that would cause those concerns.
Perfect. And then just not going into the specifics, you skimmed over it. Just my question overall with your update, it was very detailed. It was wonderful. Do you have any concerns with any of the timelines or what was expected versus the potential outcome of any of the long list of things that you're working on?
The biggest concern I have right now is Bryant Middle School, the roofing. We had a couple parts back ordered. We're still waiting on those, and that's not completed yet. All of our projects, everybody asks when I work at the district, oh, you get the summers off, and I said, no, that's our busy time. So our goal is to have things done before school starts, and there's always a project that extends a little bit, but I feel like we've done very well this year on that, and we're just making preparation for next year now.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yep.
Amanda, Ashley?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. So as you mentioned, SLEF was directed to fundraise for the athletic projects required by all the rebuilds. And I'm curious when a dollar amount will be determined for field use, because SLEF was asked not to contribute only to the Glendale track, but also the temporary sites for West and Highland. And so my understanding from our board meeting was that total contributions would be a lot higher than $600,000. So I'm surprised to hear that number, even though we have seen some cost savings collaborating with the city. So when will we know the total amount that SLEF is attempting to fundraise and their progress toward that goal?
So they met, I'm kind of talking out of my realm here because James obviously is the executive director of the SLEF. But I was involved with conversations with the McBride Foundation, and they were very excited to partner and come up with ways that the $600,000 range that I threw out there came up in that conversation. But again, it comes back to a bigger conversation with that ad hoc committee and James' leadership of saying, okay, this is what we think is doable and this is our plan. Some of the things that they've been waiting on from us is, number one, the drawings, number two, a final cost to kind of say, okay, this is an expected cost. We've given them a rough range, but again, that'll be a timing thing with working with Dr. Grant and James to figure that out.
Ashley, I think Dr. Grant wanted to weigh in on that too.
Yeah, Board Member Anderson, when we presented this, the only part that's left was taking up was working with the McBride Foundation on the Glendale field.
I would say that we should listen to that meeting again, because that doesn't seem accurate to me, that we know the McBride Foundation has partnered for the track, and it was insinuated that other partners would be sought. And so
To support the development of fields, these temporary fields, we may need to, because I don't remember that conversation, and in speaking just quickly with SLEF's director, James Yapias, he didn't remember either, and I remember.
I'm happy to pull the time signature, because then in a subsequent conversation, it was further asked that we get some updates from the foundation on their total as well as their progress, because in subsequent meetings, we additionally directed them to fundraise for other projects, and board members expressed concern that the foundation was being asked to shoulder too large of a burden when they'd already been asked to subsidize athletics. So I'd be very concerned if other fields are going by the wayside I'm happy to pull the time signature for that, but I do have a couple more questions with my time. The second is, you addressed a little bit the community input. So we received a lot of community input at the open house, and also elected representatives, sitting here, as well as our, partners in the city council, as well as the state legislature, have received concerns from the community and compliments from the community, to be fair. When they are seeking a response, is there a preferred way, from your point of view, that they can find frequently asked questions, or is it just tune into board meetings? What's the best way for people to see evidence of their feedback in action?
The most active place is our website for the bond projects. We actually hold weekly meetings with our communications group to talk about those things and try to give them an update and get those on the website. And then these other meetings will work with them to update those as quickly as possible as well when they don't line up with those other meetings. But that's the best way to reach out and let us know.
That's really helpful, thank you. And the last thing I did just want to offer a thank you on behalf of the Wasatch School Community Council, where many parents had some great feedback about the tunnel improvements. I understand there was like a rain hiccup, and we were solving that. But in general, people were very happy to see that there was a lot of action on that after, many questions and a lot of confusion about who owns it, who stewards it, and all of that, and they were very appreciative of your work to set aside funds to manage the tunnel improvements, so thank you.
Thank you. I'll pass that along to the team.
Thanks, Ashley. Charlotte?
Yes, I had a question. I was not able to attend the public meeting that was at Glendale, but I heard from a few people that they felt a little surprised that this was the first time they had a chance to give input on the field, on the field use, the temporary field use by West High. And I'm wondering if there are going to be any other public input sessions, just so we can hear from the community. And I know we can't please everybody and we can't cater to everybody, but to let them feel heard. Are there any more planned?
There are none on the calendar right now, but we did tell them that we would take their input and work on that, and then reach out in some way. If that's another meeting, we can do that. We did hear in there that several of the people that attended said, look, the only reason I knew about this was because my neighbor told me. But we actually had the Community Learning Center and their staff, they delivered to every door around that community to make sure that specifically the people abutted up against this property knew that this was happening, to ensure that we don't have continual issues that, unfortunately we fell a little short with the Roslyn Heights community, and we need to do better, and that's the intent of it. So I would say yes, we will be getting back to them, but there's nothing on the calendar right now because we needed to, well, number one, I'm looking at the budget to see if it's really, lights are doable. That's a really expensive thing. The plan was to put the infrastructure in from the get-go, so if that was ever decided to happen in the future, but initially the budget was, how do we get the field that we need as quickly as we can, so we can deal with next spring's sports. But we heard them. We're looking at the budget to see if that's doable, and we'll come back to you. We'll come back with more information.
I have another question. For cost purposes, which is more expensive, the grass or the AstroTurf?
So AstroTurf is more expensive up front, but the cost of labor and maintenance of a normal grass field is more expensive long-term. And the other challenge is the benefits of AstroTurf over lawn is that we have the field to use 9-10 months out of the year, rather than 6 months and then having to refurbish the field, or the complaints and concerns about safety that we've heard about the soccer field at East and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Charlotte. Then we have Brian and then Annie.
Yes, on your report, and I would echo, it's really wonderful to have that itemized breakdown of all of the projects. And I mean, it gives me appreciation for everything that you're managing as well, Isaac, so thank you. Under playground surfacing and equipment, you talk about PIP roll coats. Can you tell me what PIP roll coats are?
Yes, I'm sorry. Pour in place, PIP stands for pour in place. It's basically the soft rubber,
Okay.
soft fall system that we have at a lot of our buildings right now. It was the latest and greatest years ago, and it still has its purposes, but it does require a lot of maintenance. So we're actually investigating some other options that are less expensive. But to maintain that, especially in our climate, we have to do a protective surface seal over it to make sure that it lasts the length of the lifetime.
Well, that helps me, and I think it probably helps some members of the public as well.
Yeah.
Under that, you give a breakdown. You've got the 2024-25 schools that you were doing that with, and then you have the 2025-2026. Underneath the 2024-25, it's saying completion by end of July. So I'm assuming that all of those, have they been completed?
Without having the list in front of me, I believe there's one of them that we're still waiting on.
Oh, okay.
But that's why we break that down by fiscal year, because we do the best we can to line those out to have the 24-25 done before the end of the fiscal year. And then the others, we have to get on the schedule for this fall to make sure that they're on early enough for next spring for them to get them done for the next fiscal year.
Okay, I was just trying to make sure because it said just end of July, and I thought it probably meant July of this year,
Yeah.
and not July.
Yes,
Of next
July
year.
of this year. Yeah.
Okay, and then the other one, the 2025-26, those are scheduled to be completed sometime this coming year, but you're saying that 6 of them are already done as well.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you so much for all you're doing and for the hard work of your team. Just a quick question on, behalf of parents and community members that was alluded to earlier. I was just wondering what, mechanism your communications team is using to receive input and organize that input from parents or community members. There's so many capital projects right now, but
Yeah,
generally.
are you referring to specific capital projects or just in general?
I'm just saying in general,
Okay.
because I know there's a lot of input from Rosslyn Heights, from Glendale, but
Yeah.
also from Highland and West with these new builds and designs that have just been shown. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering what you have in place for each project. Maybe it's separate, or is there a catch-all where they can choose which project they want to give input on?
So, the high school builds specifically, they're a little more cumbersome in that we presented to the board of what they were. Generally, the design portion of that is internal. We found out this year that there's a portion of that we work with the city on now. That hasn't happened in the past. But as far as input from individuals, it's mostly at the public meetings that we've held over the last year. We've had 3 or 4, 3 at each of the high schools that we gave drawings and invited people to come and talk about those. Other input that other ways to input or to respond on the bond page projects, but those are project specific. Other projects, for example, the Wasatch Bridge, or tunnel. That's been a long time coming. As Ashley mentioned it was unclear who managed it, who was responsible for certain things, how to get it done, what was appropriate, what wasn't. So that's been a cumbersome conversation of about 3 years, talking about with the school, the community, and then with the school district and the city to finalize and get that done. So each one's a little different. The bigger projects, but mostly have been the public meetings that we've held to
Okay.
present what's designed so far and then take feedback from that. But it's not necessarily reaching out to individuals saying, what do you think about this specific item?
Okay, so, just a follow-up. For a working parent or guardian or somebody in the community who does not make the meeting, is there any follow-up that they can do? Like a survey or any email that they've been given to direct their questions?
Yes, Jason.
We have set up a specific email for questions about construction. It's actually very easy. It's questions@slcschools.org.
Okay,
And I manage that every single day and reply to everyone that comes in.
thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Any other questions? Okay. Are there any other questions from Bryce? I don't have any questions either. Dr. Grant, is there anything that you wanted to follow up on or clarify?
No, I think we can do that offline.
All right. Isaac, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate the time. Oh, Foss? Sorry. Foss, have you had any questions?
Not on this
Okay.
subject.
Thank you. And thank you, Ashley, for pointing that out. Moving on to our discussion agenda. The first item there is strategic plan for student achievement revisions. Dr. Ruiz, I believe this is your presentation to share with us.
Well, I actually don't have a presentation. We updated the documents and the link. We created a new draft or proposal for your review. Are there any questions?
Ashley?
I have a couple of questions. The first one, I apologize, I didn't ask in advance because I just received a message right before our meeting that I thought a change had been made to the CTE requirements because the way the strategic plan is written, it excludes IB students who are unable to complete 2 CTE requirements along with receiving their IB diploma unless specific classes are offered, which currently are not offered at West. Has there been any attempt to make sure the strategic plan does not exclude IB students?
Okay, I'm going to defer that question to Dr. Hall. Do you have any answer to that? Is that the same question on the original memo?
I asked before
Okay.
and I thought it had been resolved. And so
Okay.
then she pointed out to me right before the meeting, a constituent, like I thought that this had been addressed and it was still there. So I just wondered what the plan was.
I'm trying to remember what the percentage, we said, the percentage of students that would complete that requirement is. Because across the district, I believe that we looked at that and determined that as a district strategic plan, while IB students in specific programs, the larger one at West and the smaller one at Highland, would have to make some choices around that. It isn't 100%, and we would be able to ensure that a sufficient number of students were able to meet that requirement, even if they were not IB students.
I think it says all. So I don't know if it'd be helpful to look at the document, but I think it says all students. And so I would be curious about how we would adjust that.
Like that, page 9, students will complete at least 2 credits of advanced or career CTE coursework. And then the next objective 3.4 says 100% of students on a career college pathway. Ensure all students who go to college also have stackable credential. 75% of students will be pathway concentrators, take 2.0 credits in a pathway.
Okay.
So I don't know.
So is the board suggesting that we lower that from all to a lower percentage? Is that?
I'm not, as an individual, I'm saying that I don't support an aspect of the strategic plan that would exclude some students when it's meant for all students, and it causes anxiety. I've shared before that these requirements are gonna change our support for the IB program. So I just want some clarity about what changes should be made, by the group.
May I follow up with a question on that? So it says all students will be on a college or career pathway, but then under that, the sub-metrics are 50% of students will be completers, meaning they take 3 credits, and 75 will be concentrators who take 2 credits. So is Dr. Hall was
Thank
saying.
you. I couldn't remember if it was 75 or 85, but I thought it had a 5 in
That we
it.
set those numbers so they don't exclude students and we're able to meet those thresholds. But I think getting on a college and career pathway, in fact, the IB is considered one of those pathways by itself.
To clarify, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about where it says students will, and it does not specify an amount, complete 2 CTE credits.
I'm not sure where that is.
Objective 3.3.
If we
Oh,
need,
there we go, on
yeah.
3.3.
if we need to reword that so that it better reflects what the superintendent just read,
I think
that
it needs to
would be the
say
intent.
75% of students.
yeah.
I will,
After you're done.
yeah, I was just hoping to use the rest of my time for additional questions, if that's
And I don't know.
amenable.
Come back, yeah.
The other concern I had about the strategic plan is I was a little bit surprised, as I shared via email, that there was some work being done on a portrait of a graduate, where this strategic plan right now culminates in the State Board of Education's portrait of a graduate. And so I took the liberty of reviewing some of the meetings that happened in January 2022, where the board actually voted against an RFP that included the development of a portrait of a graduate. And the rationale for that vote included a request for an update on the USBE's portrait of a graduate, which I haven't found any evidence that that yet occurred. And the rationale was also based on some board member frustration that the board had been excluded from potential actions. So I just wanted to say the other thing that's come up in the interim of our last discussion of the strategic plan and now is that we seem to kind of be working against ourselves. Like, it was very specific in January 2022 that the strategic plan student achievement plan would both be braided, this was a word used repeatedly, with a portrait of a graduate, and board members were really clear they wanted first to know about the USBE's portrait of a graduate. So in our last meeting, I couldn't have predicted that this work I didn't know was happening. And I think it's really important that if we are intending for this plan as presented to culminate in some type of portrait of a graduate that's different than the state expectations, that we also consider discussing that before we advance amendments, because they would necessarily be impacted by one another per that discussion and past board votes.
Now, now that you've said it that way, Board Member Anderson, I remember that conversation. It was because of the RFP. I remember that there was significant conversation about not hiring an outside committee to come in and to do this work, and subsequently we did not. So it was, I think that conversation was around that RFP proposal. I'd have to go back and review that and review my notes as well, but.
And I spent a good portion of the weekend listening to the meetings because no one had recalled it. And it was, as you point out, partially about the firm, but it was also about the lack of board member input in a potential portrait, and the lack of board member input in other aspects of what was being called a like 3-pronged braided process. And so I think just, it seems like some work is happening, which I'm sure has the best intent for producing, great outcomes for students. But I would say it's important that I think we learn from what happened in January 2022, that when work happens that's all related and the board's only informed about part of it, it's hard to make an informed decision. So if we're actually working toward a new portrait of a graduate, I think it would be wise to take several steps back and first fulfill those steps on updating the board on what is the USBE's portrait, and is there a board direction to work on a district-specific plan?
Yeah, can I clarify a couple of things? So the memo was our first effort to communicate with the board that we have intentions to develop a portrait of a graduate of some sort. In reviewing our current strategic plan, now before I go into that, the other point to that is that the development of the portrait of a graduate is going to take multiple years. And so it wouldn't impact the current iteration of the strategic plan, although we know that our current iteration of the strategic plan is a living document, so it's not going to be impacted this year, but we're going to be making adjustments from year to year that we'll bring to the board based on our data based on what we learned, based on goals that we have accomplished, and so we need to build on the next goals that we need to work on, again, informed by our data. And so that was our first communication with the board. We didn't want to move forward in developing anything until you had that knowledge. Now, as a point of a little bit of context for the board, last year, USB hosted an institute that brought together 5 to 6 different districts. And they did that as a way to help districts, included urban and rural districts, as a way to help them develop their own portrait of a graduate. They understand that the USBE portrait of a graduate, as it is a lot to be able to implement in a given district. So they are using that more as a model to help us go through the process to develop our own. Now, in that institute, Salt Lake City School District sent a team to learn about the process and what all of that entailed. And districts were able to share not only the process that they've gone through, develop their own, or where they were at that time in the process of developing the portrait of a graduate. So you'll see a variety of portrait of a graduates according to the context and the students in each of their districts and what their communities and stakeholders value is important to their communities and what they determine a future-ready vision for what a graduate should have in terms of knowledge, skills, and dispositions should be. So that's kind of what I understand as far as what we've done. To this point, now we've come together, and they taught me kind of that process that they went through last year. And from that, we determined to continue these conversations. Right now, if we were to move forward, we're still at the ideation, brainstorming stage. From there, you have to go through a design process and then community input. And so there's a lot of steps. And right now, we did share in the memo kind of a tentative timeline that will have full implementation potentially in 2028, or we could use it to inform the next iteration of our strategic plan, which will be in 2029. So that's kind of where we're at. I just wanted to clarify some of those points because I don't have a lot of the background history on the RFP and what those conversations were at the time. But this is our current thinking right now and kind of what we are considering with developing.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz.
Yeah.
Amanda?
I guess the comment that I wanted to make kind of played off of Ashley's concern around the CTE requirement and the language, but I just wanted to, I guess, emphasize and clarify that we need to determine what the conflicts might be with the IB program and then change the terminology in that section to eliminate the conflict. And so what I was hearing, and very valid, I feel is, let's start with that IB piece and determine if and what conflicts with the CTE requirements in those 3.3 and 3.4. And then we look at the adjustment of the language in that section to not create turmoil with a certain student population. We want to help every student feel like they've got an avenue that they're not going to have a consequence for because they're pursuing something different than I think is what I'm hearing, which I agree strongly with. So until we can answer that question of what's the IB conflict with the CTE requirements, we can't necessarily ensure that we're comfortable with the language in that CTE section.
I think Board Member Anderson was explaining that well, that because of the structure of IB, there's less room to take CTE courses unless there's specific ones that fit into their schedule which they may or may not be interested in, if those are the only ones available. So I think she was concerned, if I can get this right, more with the goal that said all students should take 2, but less concerned with the goal that said 75%, so that across the district, we'd have this goal of trying to increase the number of students who would become concentrators or completers in the CTE pathways, but not place undue pressure or unfair pressure on students who may not be able to meet that expectation. So I think it's editing the goal.
But my piece would be with data, because this will still overlays and special education in that, like, let's throw out rough, I'm guesstimating, I don't have any data facts. But if it's only impacting 10% of the students through the IB conflict, but we're saying only 75% versus all, then we have an additional 15% of students there that are not supported in that success because it's a lower percentage.
Yeah,
So
I'm not
which
sure.
can also indirectly cause students with disabilities, especially more complex students, to not be supported and successfully accessing that piece. So that's where I was excited about the all. I see the conflict with the IB, but I would hate to lower it to 75% if we really don't need to drop it 25%. And then we have kids that are at risk typically that are not
Oh, I see.
supported to access the CTE pathways. So resolving one too ambitiously could then cause an issue with different population of students. That's my concern. So find the data, what's our IB student population, the percentage that encompasses, and at least try and put that percentage closer to what's necessary to not cause a conflict with IB and not too big of a gap that we leave out at-risk students.
Yes, I get what you're
Follow me?
saying on that, so trying to, I just don't know. So what we've done with these goals is we've raised them from the current state of where students are. I think, I'm gonna get this wrong, but somewhere around 20 to 30% of kids are concentrators. And so we're raising the bar, but not all the way to the top yet, because again, this is a 5-year plan and we're gonna keep growing this. So I don't know that it implies that we would press harder to support kids, and particularly kids from certain subgroups from participating, but rather we saw that as a bit of a stretch goal already to get there, because the current number is so low across all groups of students. If that makes some sense on that one?
No, I follow you.
Okay.
I'm there with you. To just summarize, let's just, I guess, in simple terms, we've got a lot of generalizations going on, and I think that the thing that the board talks about a lot is being data-driven in our decisions, and there isn't, there isn't concrete data in this discussion tonight, I guess, is my point. I hear that it's a stretch goal, so I can get behind that piece, as long as it doesn't cause a conflict with the IB program, so.
Thank you, Amanda. Any other board members want to weigh in on either the topic of IB and some of the conflicts and pressures that we're hearing from board members, or any other questions relative to the revisions that have been presented to us? Brian?
I wanted to look at the first pillar. Oh, and to begin with, I really appreciate the work that's gone into this, because as I look at the strategic plan that we're looking at, or the strategic plan for student achievement, we're now at 14 pages instead of 32 or whatever. And I think that that makes it a lot more accessible, so that we are able to, well, access what it is that we're really striving for. Having said that, when we go down to Pillar 1, Educational Equity, Access, and Student Support, if you go down to Goal 1, Objective 1.2, schools will provide opportunities for students to fully engage in enrichment and extracurricular activities through the elimination of barriers. Okay, and then it goes on. I mean, I don't want to read it. We can all read it. My concern is, I mean, I have received letters, and I just received one a week ago from a parent at East High who was really concerned with children that are coming from Glendale and those areas to participate in sports, and the amount of connections they have to go through to get buses and to get back and forth and all of those things. I just want to make sure that when we're creating these goals and these objectives, that we're looking to see that we're really going to be able to support it. Because the examples that were being given to me, and this parent was a parent of a student in our neighborhood, but who was trying to help a student over in the other neighborhood get access to these programs. That's my comment.
Thanks, Brian. Annie?
So it sounds like there's been a lot of work going into this and that it's a living document, as you mentioned. I just am curious as to a little bit of, as they've asked earlier, of some of the data sources used to reach these stretch goals. For example, like even the transportation, as is, there's always transportation needs that the district is unable to fill, and then, as Board Member Jensen points out, if we're trying to increase participation, what strain will that put on transportation? So I'm just wondering a little bit more about the process, I guess, of where you're coming to these numbers.
Okay, so again, I'm gonna have Dr. Hall or Dr. Taylor come and share a little bit about the process. I was not part of that process, so I can't speak to it, but some of my colleagues may.
I can talk to it a little bit, and
Okay.
that is, on each of these metrics, we looked at where things are now.
Yeah.
That we could measure. And then, actually, because data doesn't tell us what the aim should be, we tried to find an aim that was doable with what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish. So, again, they're kind of stretch goals, and that's one of the reasons we made it a working document too, that either, some of them we may meet sooner than 2029, some of them, and then we'd want to adjust things. Some of them we might not get close enough there. But the idea was to try and hit something that was a ways out, but achievable
Okay.
in that.
So I guess my concern is that if we have this vision set forward for students and, staff and administrators to try to work towards this strategic plan, if the scaffolding is not able to be in place, if we don't have the funding to meet those goals, that it will be considered,
Not viable.
not viable, or maybe not realistic to work towards, or even maybe people do work towards it, but it's setting them up for failure.
Yeah.
So that's just my only concern, because I think there probably are some places where we are, and the data shows that we may only be able to grow 1 or 2%, just due to so many conflating factors, including transportation, all these other things. Other indicators, maybe we can grow another 20% because we're increasing resources and staffing around certain things like CTE. But my general concern is just the data, which you can't necessarily have, but you could maybe extrapolate a little bit on what these numbers look like.
Any other comments, questions, feedback? Seeing none, we could go into round 2. So I saw Brian's hand first, and then Amanda, and then Ashley.
I would just follow up on Board Member Romano's. what I was trying to get at there, because I think it's laudable when we are establishing these goals and objectives, but we really do have to consider how we're going to accomplish it, because what we don't want to have happen is a part of our community feeling like, well, you have this lofty goal that is unattainable just because of physical challenges and all of those things. So I just don't want to build into a strategic plan frustration from the beginning. And then, well, that's fine, I won't take more time.
Amanda?
I am going to repeat myself from another time and then another comment, and goes back to HR. I'm still gonna do a plug for adding AppleS to our strategic plan, because we've got the general education type support, but we don't have the special education dedicated support, and special education is still a part of our district. And I haven't said it before, I'm not gonna like jump off a cliff for it, but the other strategic plan in this living document would be a really great aspirational goal is 100% staffed by school start. I know there's a lot going on. I know there's a lot that feeds into it, but we still don't have special education paras fully staffed in our classrooms. This impacts our students' educations. This wears out our teachers. This causes a lot of problems, and so I mean that's a topic I want to plan on hitting at another time, but we've got to get to the point that we're figuring out how to be staffed from the start of the school year so that all of our kids have an opportunity to have a quality education from day one and not wait to be staffed.
Ashley?
Sure, I think, again, it's important just that we modify the CTE requirement, and it sounds like there are some other things that people are hoping to modify. So it'd be helpful to capture those and then present a revised, clean copy that we could be confident in approving. And I just wanted to reiterate my former concern that, again, I realize any attempt to create a portrait of a graduate comes from a good place of wanting students to succeed and having a good picture. And I think it's just procedural that now we're at least a few steps into what's been identified for us as a multi-year plan that wasn't directed by us and which could be completed before the expiration of this strategic plan. So I do think procedurally it's important that the governing board direct whether the district consider a specific portrait of a graduate, and a precursor to knowing whether that's the right direction to go would be receiving an update on the completed USBE portrait that was requested in 2022 when that work was still underway. And I think placing those items like in their original braid, as it was mentioned before, would help us know we're making amendments that are working towards some overall goal that we all mutually understand what that is. Is that really my timer?
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Ashley. I'll just use my couple minutes for a question for you, Dr. Grant. Just kind of hearing the conversation, I know that there's probably some urgency among district staff and district office staff. I mean, think among us as board members too about getting a plan in place, that we can start working towards. And I'm just wondering, kind of where you're at right now based on the conversation. Because I know it's on our discussion agenda, we could take action tonight, but it sounds like there's still some lingering questions. But I do wonder about the urgency.
I don't think we take action tonight.
In the district.
There's some pieces here that you're raising that would, I think, take much more of a revamp than we have presented to you as a board. When we talked about this before and delaying a vote of the board, there was a general agreement among the board that we would continue to work on these goals, even though they weren't yet approved. So these are ones that have been approved in past years. We've reshaped some of the language and some of the metrics, but it's not a wholesale revision. So we're continuing along the same path. We've currently got implementation teams in place that are working on each pillar, that are doing the things that you're raising around considering the resources that we're putting toward that, looking at the logistics challenges of meeting some of these goals and things like that. So that's what those teams are doing and meeting regularly. And Dr. Ruiz is overseeing that with an implementation tracker, with all the subsidiary steps that we have written down about ways we're gonna make those to those goals. That's more an operational document. We shared that, at least a draft version with you some months ago. So there's clarity around the change to the CTE goal. Board Member Longwell, I'm not quite sure, you want us to revisit as we looked at where we should set the metrics, we weren't thinking of, let's exclude this many students and set the bar right there. So, 8% of our population is IB students, therefore we're gonna set us at 92%, hit the bar. As I mentioned, we were looking at where we are right now and what seems achievable in 5 years as a goal up that way. So with that one, I'm a little unclear about what direction we're being given on this to move forward. I don't know what to present before you next time, actually, as an alternative to what's there now. And then also these questions a little bit about the resources. I'm not sure, again, what to present to you in a next iteration or a next conversation about this that might be useful.
Yeah, can I add something, especially because this is our first time, if you remember when we shared the tracker, this is the first time we're adding the resources. So then our action steps, our objectives, all of the pieces are aligning with the resources. So this year we're learning what resources we have that will make the goals achievable. And that could inform what we bring back next year when we adjust the goals based on our data. But we need to go through those resources this year to see what is achievable versus what may take a bit longer, or how we need to secure some of those resources to be able to achieve our goals.
Would it be possible that the next time the strategic plan is presented, maybe with a CTE adjustment,
Yeah, that one's clear.
would it be possible to also send over, maybe this is a separate question, but the operational plan as well, so that we can have a little context towards
The tracker.
the tracker, yeah.
We can, with the understanding that that's a document for staff to manage, it's not managed for the board. And so I say that because it's constantly being changed and the draft changes and what's happening to try and meet these goals constantly changes.
Yeah, I say that just as that would be a tool for us to feel more confident in that there are action plans in place and resources and things being evaluated that do impact the strategic plan. But from my perspective, it would give me more confidence in approving the strategic plan, knowing kind of what's going on in the background with the implementation teams and the tracker.
Bryce or Charlotte, do you have anything to add? I see some other hands floating up.
No, I think the conversation has been good, and yeah, I understand that our role as the board is the overall, establishing the goals and where we want to be, and it's the role of the district staff to implement those, right? So, but it's nice to see how they are doing it.
Charlotte? Okay, Bryce. And then, Brian, I'm sure you have a little bit of time left on your 2 minutes. I saw your hand float up too, so. Anything else that you wanted to add?
Oh, I thought, right.
No.
Oh, no. In response to your comment, Dr. Grant, I think one of the things that will also help us here is, we have some transportation reports that are coming up, and it will be interesting to see what comes in those reports as well.
We're looking more in those reports at getting kids to and from school.
Right.
I'm not sure I understand quite the problem that you were describing there that would inform what we bring back to you about
I thought we had
transportation.
two transportation
We do.
reports.
One's
Okay.
about general transportation and how that's gone,
Okay, and I guess
and
that's
the
what I
other's
was thinking.
more
that-
directly about special education students.
Okay, so that general transportation, would there be a part of that where we would be looking at how we're facilitating like extracurricular activities and getting the students there?
We could add that, I mean, that actually has not come up internally as a barrier that we've seen. So
Okay.
hearing from a constituent that there's a problem would be useful, because otherwise, we're not seeing that as a barrier right now to the goals. But we can
Well,
bring back
I know
information
that-
about what's done that
I know that I
way.
have constituents that have raised that concern, and I'm looking over at Charlotte, and I think Charlotte may have had some, I don't know, but you seem to be kind of affirming.
Yeah, I've heard things like that, yeah.
Okay.
I have as well.
Transportation to opportunities?
Well, oftentimes after school, they will stay for practices or games, right? And then they can be transported to wherever they need to go, if it's an away game or et cetera. But then getting home from that
Yes.
is the question at hand. And that will require other transportation. Maybe UTA is available, maybe it's not, that type of thing.
Okay. So around athletics?
Yes, that's where I'm at.
Okay.
Foss.
I'd just like to comment that from what I've observed, for some athletics practices, there are school buses that are provided for students to return from just regular practices. But often the scheduling for those buses may be slightly out of alignment with when students are being released from those sport activities. And that leads those buses to be largely unused. Like in my personal experience, there may be only 2 students out of practices with maybe 60 students that are using those resources. And so it might be possible to structure that in a way that provides more efficiency and would allow buses to be allocated to other areas or increase the use of the current buses. I don't have data on that, but that's an observation.
It helps us a great deal when those are sent forward to us, because we actually don't have any specifics right now that would help us think about reallocation.
Okay.
Unless we hear those directly, then we don't know where the rub is on all of this.
I will send this to you. I was out of town, but I'll get those to you, yes.
That's helpful to have, but that's helpful too, Foss, thank you about thinking about that.
Well, I think we've kind of reached the point of needing to move on in our agenda. Is there anything closing? You
Yes,
need to look.
and I'm not sure I'm clear about what we should bring back to the board regarding portrait of a graduate.
Dr. Grant, what I was going to suggest is we seem pretty clear on CTE and the 2 elements that are coming from Amanda and from Ashley. There's still some lingering questions that you had noted in our discussion, and I'm hoping that offline, so that we can get moving on to our next agenda items, that clarification can be managed,
Okay,
but also shared out with the rest of the board. And so hopefully by the next time we agenda this, that we have a more clear understanding about what's being asked and what we should be presenting on.
okay.
Does that work for you?
Mhm.
Does that work for the rest of the board? Okay. All right,
Sorry, to answer your question, the superintendent asked about portrait of a graduate. She didn't only ask about the strategic plan.
And he was mentioning we could talk offline and get clearer about what the request is that you want brought back.
Okay.
thank you, team. Moving on to item number 2, we have the diploma proposal. Dr. Hall?
It's nice to be back here again. I think this is our second or third. So Board Member Romano, it's nice to have you join the conversation, and Mr. Goodwin, nice to have you join the conversation. This has been an ongoing and evolving conversation around graduation and what that might look like in the future for the Salt Lake City School District. So I just want to bring our new members into our conversation. Right now in Salt Lake City School District, we require 24 credits for a student to graduate in specific areas. That's the state minimum. They set those areas and set those requirements. Yet in our schools, students can earn 8 credits a year, which would be 32 credits in 4 years. Oh, sorry, what's happened here? Oh. At least it's not power. I charged tonight, so. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Quantz. And if a student is attending LDS seminary, then they can still earn 28 units without taking classes outside of school at all. We also know that last year, about 80% of our seniors had less than a full schedule, which when we think about the opportunities for different things that they could be taking, CTE classes or music or wood shop or a language, I mean, lots of different things that they could be doing with those periods of time that we have wonderful, highly qualified teachers ready to bring them things that will move them forward. And we also know in our district, and I've got a slide about this later, that at least 43% of our seniors last year graduated with more than 28 credits. So in our previous discussions, we have, as I said, continued to evolve this concept together as a district with you as the board. And we have talked about a couple of things. We've talked about having district name diplomas for 24 credits and school name diploma for higher credit diplomas. That didn't really seem to be something that people thought was a great idea. So we know that that was a thing that we brought to the table, but perhaps we wouldn't continue with. We also talked about having a separate diploma that might have some recognition at the district level for students that achieved above average. And so that's one of the things that we'll talk some more tonight. Again, with the recognition or the remembrance that school recognitions, which sometimes are very personal to the school, would remain in place. And then, of course, we would still have all of those state or national recognitions. This would just be a recognition that the district would say, we as a district choose to recognize students that achieve X, and then we would fill in the blank for X. So just to come back to some of the, not current data, but current data as of last year from our graduating seniors, this is a chart that shows, and we've looked at this before, if you were here in previous meetings, that in our 3 comprehensive high schools, we have at least 56% of students across our 3 high schools earning 27 or more units to graduate. And in fact, at Highland High School, more than half of students earn more than 28 credits before they graduate. And I present that for us to think about the idea of what would it look like if we raised graduation requirements. And so I appreciate Board Member Longwell's concern about a stretch goal. What is a stretch goal when we think about what this might look like, whether it is for increasing the number of credits for a diploma, or if we're talking about a diploma of distinction, where we're saying this is a student who does more. This is where we kind of currently are at, which is a really heartening number. I mean, when you think about it, I think it would be, well, I think that it is really good to see how many students, in fact, even earn more than 32 units. So they have taken classes either before high school or on the side of high school or through an online program. We have a lot of students doing a lot of learning in this district. I'd also like to bring this slide forward to you. This is the average data, or the current data for last year, as of last year, for grades 9 through 12 across the district. And again, I bring this to you because one of the elements of a diploma of distinction we have discussed has been a GPA requirement, that students would complete so many units, but they would also have a GPA above a certain level. So again, in keeping with the idea of a stretch goal, we need to know where we are so that we know what a stretch is. And so you can see here that across the board, our district average for GPA is 2.51. And our school with the highest GPA is Highland at 2.9. And so I have highlighted the line there for a 3.0 and a 3.5, knowing that an unweighted GPA, the perfect score, would be a 4.0, which would be a straight A average. So that just hopefully sets a little context for where we currently are as we enter the conversation. Now, we were asked to bring some recommended options forward to the board this time. So, of course, the way I see it, it's always 3, and that's because I grew up on Schoolhouse Rock, and 3 is a magic number, so there we are. But the first option is that we leave the graduation requirement the same, that we just say 24. The second option is that we decide as a district to increase the graduation requirements for all students to 27 or 28, as we look at that data, one of those, but 27 units, by adding 3 units of elective credit. And the reason we talked about in the study session that we would leave that as elective credit is that leaves it very open for students who want to take anything from a CTE class to an IB class. So everything that we've talked about tonight would not be affected by the idea of adding 3 elective credits, because those could be any credits that the students choose to take. And then we have also, as I said, talked a lot about, what might happen with students that would need a 24 credit option. And so we have looked at some other opportunities or options. For instance, having an IEP team specify that there would be a school named, not a district name, but a school named diploma 24 credit option if that was something that was appropriate for a student. And then, of course, a diploma of distinction option that would require students to complete, and again, this is a fill in the blank as I look for input from the board, completing 28 units or 29 units, which again would be additional electives, because we have really decided that as varied as our educational program is, specifying those units might impact some students' programs. And so just adding electives with a GPA of 3.0 or higher. And again, Highland at an average of 2.9, 3.0 would be a small stretch goal, but that's also a goal that we could continue to look at, or that you could say right off the bat might be a 3.5. So those would be the options that we have. I'd also like to point out that they're not mutually exclusive, that you could have a combination of, for instance, 1 and 3 or 2 and 3. You could mix and match a little bit. It's kind of a animal. One doesn't preclude the others. And we'd also like to remind you that these would go into effect for the class of 2030 at the earliest, no matter what change was put into place, so that nobody currently in school would be adversely affected by this decision. I was also asked to bring back some information about stakeholder input and some options for that. So we're going to, on the next slide, take a look at our draft survey and some focus group questions. And we are looking at doing a survey for parents of students in grades 7 through 12. And for middle school, because those would be the students who would be affected by any change that we put into place, we would be asking parents to consider what effect that this would have on their student in middle school. And while high school students, we would assure them this is not going to affect anything for your student, but we would like to have their input because they are currently living the credit and GPA journey with their student. We have also considered, if the board would like us to move forward with a survey for students in high school already. We've talked about students in middle school, but right now at the beginning of their 8th grade year, a lot of these discussions about credits haven't started to happen yet. And so we feel like asking the questions about a diploma like this or a diploma of distinction or a raise in the graduation requirements would be most appropriate for students who are currently in high school and are speaking that language of credits. Mr. Goodwin, we've also talked about, before you were here, we talked about you when you weren't here and thought that perhaps there would be some opportunity for focus group questions to go to high school, the government classes, maybe SBOs, that you might help us bridge some of that. And again, assuring them that as you sit in high school, this doesn't affect you, but perhaps being able to get that student level data in addition to a possible survey. So I included a survey in the board packet, but as we always continue to refine and go through different conversations as we're looking at surveys, I placed on your chair today, and I'll also attach in the board minutes for the audience, some revised survey questions that Dr. Patrick Jeffries and I have looked over and discussed. And I just kind of want to talk about the format of the survey so that we can think about what is asking. In my first draft, of course, as you always know, I put too many words, and so we have removed many questions. I also, if Executive Director Chatwin was here, she would assure you that she always has to tell me to, kind of bring it down and just make it read like a normal document. So in every draft, I work towards reaching that goal. So the structure of the survey, and it's relatively the same for both a student and parent survey. The parent survey is directed to your student, and the student survey is really directed to you. And that's one of the major differences between the two. But the rest of the format is very similar. So of course, there's a background that sets up what it is we're asking about, and that's this exploration of changing requirements for graduation or the potential addition of a diploma of distinction. And then we ask some just background prior knowledge questions. Before we gave you this definition, how familiar were you with graduation requirements, and are these options clear? And then for the parent survey, we ask them about their student, and then of course, if they're in middle school, we say, please answer as you think this might affect your student in high school, and where does your student attend? Then we talk about some overall preference, and one of the things that Dr. Jeffries and I talked about was the order of answers. So some of the subtle shifts that we've made, you might notice, are to start our questions that rank whether or not you are choosing an approach so that the status quo is first. So status quo is keep everything as they are, and then raising minimum credits and then creating an optional diploma, or not being sure yet. And in placing that initial status quo answer first, that helps to eliminate a lot of the bias that we might feel from answering that question. And then we ask them how strongly we feel about that, because that's another good data point. If I really think we should keep requirements as they are, but I'm not sure, what we hope is that as they go through the rest of the survey and they respond to the questions that ask them to consider other aspects of this, that might help inform how they're thinking about that as they move through. So the next section goes to perceived benefits and concerns. And again, one of the changes between the one that was in the board packet and the one that you have in your hand today is moving that status quo or the concern about change to the first answer. I'm concerned that it would increase stress or reduce time for other things. And then the ones that indicate what might happen. We have one about the graduation, two about the diploma of distinction, whether it's motivational, whether we think that people might view it as worthwhile. Then we ask about the student's schedule. Would there be an impact on what they might need? And then whether or not they think that if there was a diploma of distinction, their student would try for it. We're interested in what parents think is a reasonable GPA for a diploma of distinction. And this speaks to, is 3.0 enough of a stretch goal? Is 3.5 a higher goal? 3.75, or if they're just not sure what that might look like. And then we'd like to know what would make that meaningful. If we did a diploma of distinction, what would they like to see, and
perhaps it is all of these things, but are there some that are more important to others? I think that's a question we've not asked our parents before. And I think that would be a great question or an answer for us to also know as we look at things like the Seal of Biliteracy or the Seal of Civic Readiness. Same thing, are we placing those recognitions in all the ways and places that we could so that students feel recognized for that accomplishment? And then one of our last sections is communication and planning. Again, an ongoing area of improvement for us to make sure that we're communicating with our families and parents. I always like to ask what is your preferred communication method as we continue to come out with things like Parent Square and our new website, or whether that's live with the counselors as they transition into high school. And, when should we start this? Like when should students start to hear about that? Then, after they've gone through those questions, this is kind of there's a word for it in comedy when you do a kind of a slap back to a joke you told at the beginning of the routine. I can't remember what it's called right now. But we come back to that and we say, do you think raising the minimum credits for graduation is a good idea? And maybe at this point, they might say yes or no. And that might be different than the question that we asked at the beginning. And then we ask the same for that diploma of distinction. Is this a good decision or is this not a good decision? What do you think on a 1 to 5? And then just some optional background that we're asking parents, does your student work? Or do they have sports or clubs or other time-intensive activities? That is something that we'd like to know. And then, of course, we always do an open answer for anything else that we may have missed. I won't go through the student survey because, again, it's very, very similar in terms of that, but you'll notice that if we choose to use it, then it is, how familiar are you? What sounds better for our school? What do you think about adding a diploma of distinction so that the student would be taking it for themselves? Again, even though it wouldn't affect, unless, for instance, the board directed the diploma of distinction to happen earlier, but certainly the increased graduation requirements would not influence that. And then the last page, it's page 8, and Mr. Goodwin, this is where, these are a draft, and if there are questions that our SBOs feel would be important or relevant, these are just suggestions, but it's the same kind of information. This is what we require, this is what we're thinking about, and then just some focus group questions that we would love to get some feedback, and whether that would be they record it with an AI taking notes and send that to us, or if somebody takes notes the old school way with a pen like I do, however that works for them, that we would be able to get some of that background. Our timeline for all of this would be our hoped for timeline that we've discussed in the past is to be able to finalize these. These would go out in a Qualtrics survey, so we'd be able to send directly to parents, and then we would like to see that opened on the 19th, and then keep that open for about 10 days. And then if directed to use a student survey, we'll do that through Canvas, and we'll open that on the 22nd and keep that open for that school week. And then hopefully we would be able to have some of those SBOs hold those focus group discussions. I know this is a busy time getting school started, but if we could get that student feedback, we'd find that very, very valuable to have. And so if we could have that back by September 30th, then we would be able to have all of this data, kind of drop everything and analyze, and be able to bring that back to you on the 7th. So with that being said, President Salazar.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. Let's start with questions. I saw Amanda first, Bryce, Ashley, anybody, Annie or Charlotte? Okay, and Foss. Okay, let me make sure I got this right. Amanda, Bryce.
Give me everybody.
I saw Annie, Foss, and then Charlotte as well. No? Okay. All right, well, and Brian. Thank you, Brian. Sorry. That was a quick one. All right, it's an important topic, so that's really good. Amanda, you're up.
All right, I was looking at the questionnaire, did a quick scan before the meeting started, and I noticed there was a question difference on the parent versus the student stakeholder, and it seems like the question would be good for them to be the same. It's question number 15, page 3, on the first section, or set, which is the parents one. That one says what GPA feels reasonable for a diploma of distinction, where the student one says on page 6, if a GPA is required for distinction, what feels
That feels
reasonable?
Yeah.
I believe
Yep,
the
good
if
catch.
would be better for both.
I should have carried that forward, absolutely.
Now, you have a lot of information you're going through, so
Yep.
the ideas are phenomenal.
Appreciate that. The more eyes, the better.
And then, like, I guess the other that I was contemplating is you were showing the average GPAs of the different school locations and your different concepts of sticking with 24 credits versus going to 28 credits, but then there's also this conversation about the GPA overlay with the 28 credits to get that diploma with distinction. I guess, well, rolling back, it sounds like really tonight's more about like the stakeholder input conversation, because the other requested board action would be direction on recommended options, but the way that this conversation is going, we're holding on the recommended options until the stakeholder input's coming in.
That was my understanding,
And
yes.
so it's really about the stakeholder input piece tonight, from my understanding. But as we're contemplating these things, we're waiting for the stakeholder input to come in, one of the things I was kind of chewing on was, if we do a 28 credit with like a, let's say a 3.0, so they've got like the GPA recognition. What I feel like there already are GPA recognitions out there, like you have Honor Society, I know that's a shortened version of it, 3.0
National
and a higher, and then there's different chords, I don't know them off the top of my head. So if we're gonna layer that in, maybe that would be a third option, or we just simplify and say 24 and 28, and then the GPA is kind of recognized through already existing mechanisms. So just throwing that out there is something to contemplate. That's all I
Absolutely.
have to say.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that that is a great way to look at this, you know, and you'll remember that our initial diploma of distinction was credit-based, and then again, as we iterate, we brought GPA in, but, you know, and so it's like, is it a this and a this, or a this plus this? Are we making a Hershey's bar or a Reese's peanut butter cup? I mean,
Right.
like, we can
And when we get the stakeholder
design
input,
that.
Ashley was really good about pushing for, that will help add more perspective as we're narrowing it down. So it'll be exciting to see that piece come in, but that's all I had. Thank you.
Bryce? Yeah, so I do know that we are tonight focusing on the stakeholder piece, and I want to see what information comes back from that. I think that's valuable and important. But I do want to go back to the first piece around the three options as well. The way that I kind of see it is that we are looking at two different things. We are looking at whether or not we are increasing the credits required, and then the piece about the distinction diploma as well. Again, I do want to see what comes back from the feedback from the surveys, but I'm also starting to hear from families already. And I am in support of, before we get data, again, I want to acknowledge that, or get feedback, excuse me, I am in support of the extended, the distinction, but I am not in support of increasing the credit requirements. I think it can do a lot of harm to our families and our students, and I am hearing that specifically from my constituency. So where we are right now, and I probably will stick with this, is that I will not be supporting the increase in credits. At all. Sorry, for
graduation.
For graduation, yes.
Thanks, Bryce. Ashley?
Just go right on down the row. The first thing I want to say is just thank you so much for responding. I posed some questions about the structure of the survey, and I think that in combination with Dr. Jeffries, you really did reduce a lot of the bias in the questions and improve the clarity. And I think this second pass is very strong. It's exploratory. It seems like a really good way to hear from the community about what is a very complex topic. My only note, which is related but unrelated, is that it's my understanding there's still a lot of dialogue about weighted GPA at West. This is not about weighted GPA at all, but has questions about the GPA. So my guess is those things will become, you know, entangled in some way in some of the feedback you receive from West, as that remains a conversation happening in the community. But again, just above all, I wanted to say thank you for such a quick turnaround on those edits, because it helps me to feel really confident directing that stakeholder input could begin, and that we'll get really good information from this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. I have Annie, and then Foss, and then Brian.
Yeah, thank you. I agree that the revisions were really great. I had some notes on that, and I appreciate that you you changed the order and made it as neutral as possible. My primary concern with the discussion of diploma is the increasing of credit requirements for graduation. And I also would not support that, given the constituency I represent. Because of the ELL learners, as well as special education learners and parents, I'm wondering how this will be presented to those populations, as I think it's very important for the parent populations to be engaged. So I'm wondering what languages this will be translated into and how it would be distributed to make sure that, you know, all populations within the district would be able to access it.
We always do it in Spanish, and then other language, we can do it in other languages. With this short of a turnaround, I can guarantee Spanish, and then we may have to, with a slightly shorter turnaround, so for instance, on the 19th, we would be able to put out English and Spanish, and then like on the next day, we might be able to get the rest of the languages. So we might not have the full amount of time, but we do have 5 target languages that we always attempt to get things out to parents with.
Yeah, so that was my main concern, that all 5 of those target languages would be included for the surveys.
Yeah, thank you. No, we're such a diverse district that that's a really critical concern for us when we think about parent feedback. Thank you.
I just have a couple of concerns that students have already brought to my attention within my community, although I do hope to bring a wider group of concerns later once we've had those conversations. But the first, I have about 3 things. The first thing would be the diploma name. Students have expressed concerns about like adding versus subtracting from what we have currently, and that having the district name on the 24 credit diploma might sort of subtract because it's less personalized. And at least from what I can tell, the national standard seems to be that your base diploma would always be the school name diploma. And so students have some concerns about that, although I would say that they are supportive of adding some form of an honors diploma also with the school name. And then secondarily, shortened graduation window cases for students, such as students trying to participate in technical internships that are unrelated to the school that might not be included in those elective credits, or students that are trying to do some sort of year abroad and still graduate what would be considered like early, only doing 3 years in this school system, and still being able to graduate at the same time as their peers. Where it seems if 24 credits was, with our 8 credit per year system, 24 credits is possible in 3 years, but if the credit requirement was raised across both diploma options, then that would no longer be possible and would seem to require that students packet classes or complete them outside of school hours in order to still graduate within 3 years if that was necessary for the path they're trying to take. And then in terms of survey accessibility, how would student surveys be distributed to ensure student input, like what methods are being used to send those out? And also just that students do have a strong desire to be included in that conversation. So I think it's great that they're being polled.
Great, thank you. And I just agree that we have heard, and the other board members heard loud and clear from their constituents. So the district diploma name, in terms of this proposal, is off the table. Would be the first. You had several things in there, but the 2 I want to address quickly are, then we would put the survey out through Canvas. And so when you logged into your Canvas dashboard, it would pop up and say, click here for, the opportunity to give input on this topic.
Sounds great.
Thanks, Fox. Brian?
My question goes to, I guess, bias, and I guess it would be directed, well, to you, you're presenting, but then to Board Member Anderson's concerns. When I look at some of those revisions, it was, did you know? I mean, there were some. To me, when we started looking at this subject, we were looking at what other districts were doing. And We have Granite that's right next to us that is a similar demographic. We have other districts throughout the state that are requiring more credits. I'm wondering, because I don't know how many people in the community understand that there are school districts throughout the state that are saying, we feel that it's important to increase electives, and I'm sure they have different explanations, but is that something that they should be informed about? And does that create a bias?
So just to bring this back in, Vice President Jensen is referring to, when we look across the Wasatch Front, the Salt Lake City School District is the only district on the Wasatch Front that is still requiring only the minimum of 24 units for graduation, and is one of 6 districts out of 42 in the state. And so that is another reason that we raised this topic. You know, if, as a flagship district, as the capital city district, what are our requirements for our students? What is it that we hope for our students? And so I think that's a very valuable question. I just wanted to give some context to the background for those of you who weren't here for the early presentation.
I appreciate that. For me, as a member of the community, I would want to be made aware of what was happening in other districts that are comparable to the district where my child is attending, to have that sense that the district that my children were in were reviewing and trying to determine what was the benchmark for a solid high school education.
So would that sound something, Vice President Jensen, would that sound something like, we are exploring changing the requirements for graduation to be more in line with other districts on the Wasatch Front? For instance, Davis District requires this many units, Granite District requires this many units as kind of our sandwich districts.
Well, to me, that is valuable information, but I raised the question, I don't want to be building in bias, but to me, that's providing information that they can go out and do further research.
Yeah, context.
Could that, I'll take my time now and then.
Yeah, because I'm,
and then I'll get to second rounds. I know I've seen Bryson and Annie's hand go up, and Charlotte, we're still in the first round, so you haven't had a chance to speak first round, so I'll count you next after me, if that's all right. And then we'll move to the second round, starting with Bryce and Annie. And now I just completely forgot. Oh, I remember now. Okay. I'm wondering, Dr. Hall and even Dr. Grant and Board, could that context be placed, not necessarily as a question, but kind of at the head of the survey? You know how you always have a description of what the survey is, what the aim that we're trying to get to.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that context could be provided there.
Yes,
and
that's what she.
Yeah, that,
Okay.
in that opening, kind of that opening frame, is
Okay.
that what you're referring to? Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I'm done now. Charlotte?
Okay.
We'll move to your first round comment.
Okay, so another piece of context in why we're considering this is also to encourage students, to seniors, to go to school, to go to school and not just say, oh, I've already gotten all my credits, I don't need to go to school. So it's a little bit about that absenteeism and truancy senior year. I don't know if we want to mention that in the, I mean, that's probably not, maybe absenteeism, since that's a board goal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Appreciate that. We'll move into our second round of comments. Bryce, you had your hand up in the end.
I just wanted to provide some clarity around my comments earlier. I think they may potentially have been misconstrued. I think some people got it, but my support would be that someone who earned 24 credit hours could still receive a diploma. I'm not against exploring other credits for other achievements or things of that nature, just that someone who earned 24 would have that opportunity. opportunity. I just want to make sure that's clear, not only for those in the room, but for the public listening as well.
Thank you, Bryce. Anna?
Yeah, to echo that, I would just say, given graduation rates and our student population, that we already are trying to reach, for many students, it's a reach to get to those 24 credits. So that's why I would also prefer to have just a diploma of distinction. From my background and consideration, I don't know, I mean, it may matter to some parents the context of different districts having different graduation requirements. But from a college admissions perspective, college admissions officers aren't comparing districts oftentimes with what graduation requirements are, but they will compare an honors diploma versus an honors diploma. They will compare GPAs. They will compare course loads. So from that perspective, I don't think the information of what other districts is doing is particularly relevant, but maybe to some parents it would be. I think we just focus on what is necessary for our population.
Thank you. Ashley?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Brian's question. I saw him look at me. I do think that the more context we add, the more bias we introduce, because we've been told why we think this is a good idea, but the question is kind of philosophical. Is the survey meant to be exploratory, or is the survey meant to persuade people about the logic of doing this? Well, we've been presented with the logic of why to do it, and now we want to know in a very open way, do other people think things about that are different than us, absent some of this context? And I can see your point, but I just have a different attitude about what the survey is meant to show us. And I also know that survey design is not something I'm an expert in, but it's something that, Dr. Jeffries is an expert in, I would assume, like in designing how we get the best information.
Dr. Hall.
Yeah, and how we get the best information from people. Yes, of course. And why we want to ask them this could result in some contrarian responses, that it almost dares the respondent to say, well, I don't care about other districts. I want to do what our district is going to do. And I think there's some risks that are presented in like the known literature about this field, which is very different than, educational outcomes or things we regularly look at. So I would say would be very cautious about adding more beyond what has been very, well edited by Dr. Hall and Dr. Jeffries.
Thanks, Ashley. Charlotte?
I just happen to think about how we, during elections, you'll get a pro and a con before when people go to the polls to vote on a ballot initiative. They get a pro and they get a con, and then they think about it. It helps them have a more informed vote, but they're not voting in the survey. So, yeah, I defer to the survey experts, I guess.
Thank you, Charlotte. Well, it seems like we've had a pretty good discussion. It doesn't sound like there's too many edits going to the actual language of the survey itself, or the delivery methods to it. I guess Dr. Hall and Superintendent, what would be your next steps outside of what's already been outlined in the presentation and discussion this evening? I don't think we need to take a formal vote to move this forward.
No, I think we have some differing opinions too on how to do an introduction. And I do think maybe the pro and con might be a nice way to go. The reasons to like this, the reasons to question it. I don't know if that's helpful. I do worry about people looking at it and say, why raise the credits when there's no reason? Anyway, I don't know. It'll be hard to find out from folks. But if you don't mind us working together as a team to come up with the best, given your input and going forward, then we'll do that.
I'm fine with it, just fix that GPA question.
I will, thank you. Thank you. And Mr. Goodwin, I'd like to reach out to you and get some next steps for some focus groups, if that would be okay. Great. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hall.
next agenda item is our board committee assignments. Sam, do you mind pulling up that on the screen so that board members and the public can take a look at what we're looking at as well? So while Sam's doing that, so with Annie, with you joining our board, it means that we have to relook at our committee assignments. So there's a number of committees that board members participate
Page 2, Sam.
participate in and are assigned to. Obviously,
It's a different, exhibit.
specifically, board members are tasked with participating in the board finance committee and the board policy committee. And then, of course, there's a few others like human sexuality, our representatives to city council meetings, and so on. In light of some of the issues that we faced with your predecessor, Annie, I had been participating in the board finance committee, which is a little rare for a board president to participate in one of the two committees. So we would certainly want to take a look at that, and also just plug you into the right spots on these committees that make sense. And I know some board members have also raised the question about potentially working on or participating in different committees than what they're already on. So that's the context for why we're here right now, talking about committee assignments and making sure that we're assigning these out in the best way possible to move our work forward on these committees. So with that, I would open it up for discussion. I haven't heard specifics about who might want to change their committee assignments, but I know, speaking for myself, that I think it would be best to follow practice and move off of the finance committee to make room for our full board that we now have. Bryce?
I want to make a comment. I'm not necessarily advocating for a change, but I'm thinking ahead. So I love being on the policy committee, and I'm not advocating for moving. I do want to say I'm the second most tenured board member, and I've not had an opportunity to be on the finance committee. So I'm thinking as elections take place in a year and a half, what that might look like, because I still have another 2 years. I'm just saying that I haven't had that opportunity. I'm not advocating for moving, but if it's in the best interest of the board and the district to stay or to move, I'm just putting that out there.
No,
Not
I appreciate
advocating
that,
for one or
Bryce.
another.
I know that was something that you brought up when we reconstituted these committees last time. And so, I mean, I think we're in a spot where we're open to looking at all sorts of changes, so I appreciate the feedback there. Annie?
I would be open to taking that spot on the policy committee and having Bryce take your spot on the finance committee. I'm also open to filling in where the previous board member was, and I can just be plugged in to the committees they were a part of.
That would make things really simple and straightforward. Bryce, how do you feel about Annie's proposal there?
I'm fine with that. I'm not tied to either one, but just thinking long-term.
Are there any other potential or suggested changes that board members might want to weigh in on or share?
Can we scroll?
Can I talk?
Yes.
I would be open to also participating in the Salt Lake Education Foundation Board Committee if that were open for discussion, just given my history with education foundations and nonprofits.
Yeah, for sure, Annie, and I mean, historically, board leadership has participated in that, and on that committee. Bryce elected to want to stay on that committee because of his previous engagement as a SLEF board member. And so Bryce, I don't know how you feel about that as well, but just throwing it out there.
I would like to stay on that committee. However, committees change again down the road, and I could potentially explore stepping off after that.
Okay. Yeah, and Annie, it'd be, because of our Open Public Meeting Law Act, we are not allowed to have more than 3 board members participating in any one committee,
Oh.
because we would be violating the quorum rule
Yeah.
and would have to follow a different set of standards as we do that, so.
That's fine. I'm fine with how we said.
Okay. Thank you, Annie, and thank you, Bryce. Any other thoughts or potential suggested changes?
I
Ashley?
just want to clarify that I didn't miss here. So it would be this shift between finance and policy, but then the other committees that are currently assigned to former board member Bade would be moving?
Has to,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, absent that, I have no other suggestions.
Okay. Charlotte?
Well, let's see, the traffic, no, well, you'll be on the policy committee, but the traffic and the traffic safety and wellness committee, they don't meet very often, right?
That's
And
true.
is the traffic one only as necessary, or is it
Says bi-monthly.
bi-monthly?
It's a city committee that we sit on, that we attend.
Okay.
So that one's run by the city, not by us.
Amanda, sorry, I missed you.
No, you're fine. I just want to put some clarification on some of these. It does state bi-monthly. I have not been notified or invited to attend ones outside of the finance committee. So I think we might need to revisit some of these to see how they're functioning with board members that are to be on these committees if they are occurring. So I can kind of fill you in outside of this meeting, Annie, on kind of my experience on that regard. So some are more regular than others, so it's getting used to those nuances, and I'm still getting used to it as a new board member as well. But
May I
just
make a comment?
sorry.
Thank you, Amanda. Go ahead, Amanda.
Okay, like I haven't used my time yet.
Not even time.
Otherwise, I'm in support of what was stated as far as the different recommendations, and then everything else being you taking over prior board member Bates' seat on the other ones. So just for that verbal input, I'm in agreement with that as well.
There is also the Human Sexuality Committee, and I was just gonna mention that they do look for parents to be on that committee. And in the past, they've had trouble finding parents. I don't know how it is this year, but you being a parent, it might be, I mean, you could possibly consider that as well, whatever.
I'm open to whatever is needed.
Bryce and then Ashley.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, this would be the second time that I started that committee and then we kind of kicked off of it, but if that's something you want, I'm happy to.
I'm pretty neutral. I would be happy to serve on that committee, but it's not something I,
Okay. Ashley?
Oh, what?
I just wanted to offer a point of information about the Human Sexuality Committee, that it's overseen by Dr. Hall's department, and it has statute attached to it. So Annie in her role would be attending because it's a board assignment, but by statute, a certain number of parents have to participate. And sometimes it's just challenging to find a time that a lot of parents will participate, but that they do follow all of the rules in terms of making sure we approve the committee as required by statute, and that it includes the right number of parents. It just is a question of whether we optimally get their voices. And to that end, of course, it's great when a board member who is a parent, serves a dual perspective, but by statute, they're not serving as parents. So I wanted to provide information on that. And I also wanted to thank Amanda for raising that the traffic committee is not meeting, especially as we hear so many concerns about rebuilds and transportation and traffic safety. I think it behooves us to reach out to determine why that committee is not convening, as there have been many times since I joined the board that other board members have raised. Ensuring that committee meets would reduce a lot of concerns that we hear from our community. So I don't know why I see Isaac is coming to tell the tale of what I've missed, and I certainly don't think anyone has made an error here. I just think we continue to kind of ask, what's going on with that? What's going on with that? And it really would behoove us to make sure, especially during this tumultuous time for traffic and transportation, that we kind of know where that's at. But that's not a proposal per se.
Sorry, I kind of invited myself up, but the Transportation Advisory Board meets monthly. And then the second week, they meet in conjunction with the Bicycle Advisory Committee. The board itself only has one member from the district on it, and I'm the representative that is doing that currently. I did inform the committee, or the city, that there was interested parties from the board to participate in that. That was just done last month, though, to inform them who had asked, and there should be an invitation coming for those.
And is that, sorry, this Traffic Safety and Transportation Committee that's listed on this thing? Is it the same thing, or is that different?
So
So we have these committees listed for the board.
yeah, I think there's some confusion there, because the Transportation Advisory Board is the city one. Then we have a Transportation Safety Committee that's run by transportation. And I'm not clear of,
And maybe that's the one,
Yeah.
I think that's the one we need to visit and
Okay.
iron out.
So, not the city one, the Transportation Committee?
It's an internal transportation committee?
yes,
Safety.
yeah, Transportation and Safety Committee, and that's through the Transportation Department. They don't meet bi-monthly, though. That's basically on quarterly right now. So if we need a clarification, tell me, and
When was the last time
Let's
they met?
clarify that to the board, because this question has come up a few times.
Yeah, I asked it over a year ago.
Different information each time, so let's work on that and find.
Well, and I've been on the committee since January, so if they're meeting quarterly, I ain't been part of it.
I'll get back to you on that one.
I thought that they were using it on a case-by-case basis, like when a school is having some transportation safety issues, then they convene, and Jennifer Newell is part of that as well. But I could be wrong.
That's the Transportation Advisory Board for the city. The
Oh,
one that I referred to, they meet bi-monthly. Once
with
the-
Jennifer Newell.
Well, Jennifer attends, but it's through the Transportation Department.
Oh, no, this was a
There's an
meeting.
ad hoc safety discussion for Glendale and
Yeah,
Mountain View,
yes.
with the city, and Jennifer's the one that's been,
And that's
overseeing
not this
that.
committee
Yeah.
either. Okay.
Thanks, Charlotte. Well, I think we have a pretty clear understanding minus transportation and safety. But for now, I think we should move this forward. This does require a vote of the board to reconstitute committee assignments. And I know that we've kind of gone in a roundabout way of doing this, but I appreciate the discussion. So I would appreciate if the motion to move this to action would include the changes to policy and finance committee, being that Annie will replace Bryce on the board policy committee, and Bryce will replace me, Nate Salazar, on the finance committee, and that Annie Romano will take on the infamous traffic safety and transportation committee and wellness committee.
I'm happy to make that motion. I would move that we send to action a reconstitution of board committee assignments, sending Board Member Williams to the Finance Subcommittee, Annie Romano to the Policy Subcommittee, and additionally adding Annie Romano to the Traffic and Transportation Committee, as well as the Wellness Committee.
Second that.
We've got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll start with a roll call vote with Charlotte.
Charlotte Fife Jefferson, yes.
Oh, Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Annie Romano, yes.
Ryan Jensen, yes.
Amanda Longwell, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Excellent. That is on the action agenda, and we'll revisit it when we get there. Moving along to our next agenda item, we have minor property line adjustment. Dr. Grant, I'm not sure who's planning on presenting this. Is it Alan?
It's our executive director, Aston,
Okay.
here.
Sorry, once again. So the county received a report from FEMA several years ago to address several issues along the Jordan River, the properties that they're responsible for. And as they were dealing with those challenges, there's quite a few property issues from Utah Lake down. And one of those was our property line along Beardsley, where most of our facility staff were at. The fence itself, the property we're on, it was an existing property that the district purchased and we moved into. The fence line was on the Jordan River property, the county property. And they proposed to us to leave the fence line where it's at and turn that property over to us. And by allowing them to have an access point from the north end of our property onto the Jordan River Trail, off of Beardsley Place Road. We end up with a little bit more property than we had before, but it was a good compromise and dealt with the property line issue and allows them to get the access they need to deal with the FEMA requirements that they have on the property. So we've been working on this for almost 2 years now, a year and a half. But this was the proposal to adjust that property, or to leave the property line where it is and trade property to make up for that property line difference. Does that make?
Amanda?
I think you basically answered it, but my broad question would be, do you have any concerns with this requested action?
No, I think we end up with more property and it deals with a pre-existing condition of the property before we purchased it.
Any other questions?
I have one. I didn't think of this until just now. You said you've been working on it for a while and we're just hearing about it now. Is there like a procedural way this normally goes, or it's reached our agenda because this specific interlocal agreement was drafted by the county? Is there just information, especially for relatively new board members, about how something like this would normally come to the board and why it would require our specific action?
My understanding is that the board is the only entity for the district that can approve property changes or giving up or receiving property. The reason it took so long is the county proposed this to us, and then the person that was in charge of it at the county left, and so it was about 6 months of back and forth trying to figure out who was in charge of it now. That's why it took so long. But
So
this
it's like
was
the tunnel.
yeah, exactly.
It
Yep.
wasn't because there was, negotiation over such a long period
No.
that we're missing from it. This is
Yeah, it just
kind of
had.
a novel situation.
Yep, exactly.
That's really helpful.
Lower on the priority list.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, seeing none and understanding and knowing kind of the significance of a decision like this, Isaac, board members, we do have some preferred language for a motion to move this to action. Amanda?
I move that the board move the discussion item related to the minor property line adjustment to the action agenda.
I would second.
Got a motion and a second on the table. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, roll call vote starting with board member Anderson.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Annie Ramono, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Amanda Longo, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Charlotte Fife Jefferson, yes.
Excellent, thank you, board. We will revisit this in just a few minutes. Our next agenda item is property use district needs. Dr. Grant.
What we're asking for here is just some more clarification from the board. We talked about this last time. There were a lot of conversations about what we should do next. Not a lot of clarity about what steps need to be taken. Alan and I tried to lay out in the memo where we are in G5 and the G5 process, which is we went through the initial process to look at immediate district need. The next step would then start to look at what would the community want in those different areas. What does the real estate tell us about itself? What does the financial picture look like, so that that information could be brought to the board as well. That would be a longer process. We'd go out probably to get a third party to conduct that analysis for us and bring it back. But we're still on the initial step of determining district need. There was a request to do a comprehensive needs assessment of facilities. We had mentioned that we do that each year with Isaac in his work with schools, or to do an educational assessment which aligns with the work around the strategic plan. So trying to get at exactly what the questions are, and not to have the board design the tool, but to give us direction about what we're trying to get. There was some consensus in the last board meeting that you wanted to hear from a broader group of stakeholders. You wanted to hear from principals and teachers, which is one of the steps we could take, to just ask them, what do they see as district needs in using the 3 buildings? Now again, the distinction here is that, and the reason we didn't go originally with that approach, is that there are a lot of school needs that can be met on school properties that are currently in use. School needs don't typically extend to going to other school properties and needing that whole school property. So we're trying to look at, would we designate Benyon or Mary W. Jackson or Hawthorne for a particular district need, or a few districts' needs that would all be filled within that building? Or can we say they can be surplused, which means sold off or used for another purpose that the board directs? So as owners of the property, you're the one directing this. We can do any kind of assessment you need on any kind of timeline you want to undertake to get to the point of making decisions about the unused school property. So that's kind of where we sit, and we need clarity from the board about what steps to take next.
Ashley?
I know that you mentioned we do get the information from the walkthroughs that Isaac's team does, but in several meetings, it's been pointed out that there's a difference between the way that's happening now and long-term facilities updates that used to be provided to the board. And I think one thing that requires really a comprehensive needs assessment, which is what has been asked for multiple times in my interpretation, that we have buildings that may or may not have a short-term use, but we also are a little bit unaware sometimes of the broader condition of our facilities as a whole. And so we have, specifically in Precinct 3 now, the oldest buildings in the district, and we know that they have maintenance needs. And what we do with other district buildings relates also to how we respond to those oldest buildings in the district. So part of the reason that has been presented by current and past board members for a comprehensive needs assessment is that we need a picture of what's going on with all of our facilities in order to make recommendations about what to do with some of our facilities. I also think that starting with the school collaboration teams, that's what we're calling them, SCTs now. Thank you for the affirmation that I got another acronym in the bank, but our school collaboration teams are an important way that we can get initial feedback and then kind of collate that feedback of these things we feel can be met at the school site and these cannot, like an early childhood center dedicated to early childhood that is in the center of the city, or an additional CLC or whatever it may be that serves neighborhoods that currently don't have one. Whatever those kind of options are that couldn't be fulfilled by a school site can then be put forth through the rest of G5. But part of the ask for a comprehensive needs assessment has been our misunderstanding of the big picture of our facilities. And I think that's what's most important about diligently looking at it very comprehensively, even though the outcome may only impact a small number of buildings.
That's really helpful.
So from what I'm understanding, from my perspective, it would be engaging principals and teachers in what they're seeing possibly in future or current academic or other needs that they have, as well as the larger and really long-term facilities assessment like you're talking about. Would that be like a 5 or 10 year kind of thing, I don't know. 10, 20-year outlook. I'm thinking of when Bonneville was rebuilt, students were bused to Lowell, right? And that was an empty building that was being used for a school for, I think, 2 years while they rebuilt another elementary school. So I think that's a very astute observation that we need to look long-term, because there will be other needs in the future that we might think, oh, we should have thought of that. I think the third thing that I'm really interested in is a comprehensive financial assessment, like the real estate assessment of property value, the depreciation cost of us hold on to it and maintain it versus the appreciation over time. And in the end, like, would it make more sense for us, to sell the building?
That is what that next step is. So this one, I think we could put together that facilities assessment with the information we have pretty much right now in looking at, I think you're trying to get at what is the prediction for what buildings have a certain lifespan, which is always a little hard because anything out past 5 years starts to get really fuzzy. And then even if some of our buildings or some of our boilers, we say it has a lifespan that ends here, but it ends up lasting 5 or 10 more years and we don't change it just because it came to its lifespan. So trying to predict the lifespan of a school like Wasatch that's older but is still operating fine is kind of hard to do. But we can give, Isaac's our professional in this and a real professional in this area, so can help put together a picture that way that gives you a sense of those facilities. It also sounds like, and you've mentioned this before, more board member Anderson, the idea of like an early childhood hub or a CLC. These are things the board would have to choose to invest in the long run, and weren't originally brought to the board because we weren't proposing these new things, and they weren't things that we came up with as immediate district needs. So we could look at 10 years down, would we want to do something? And is that kind of to what you're thinking of in that long term?
Yeah, to respond, I think the only piece missing from what you're saying is that going back to SCTs to then determine what some of those things might be.
We'd be asking, yeah.
Yeah, because I think something like bringing to us that people do feel like there's a need for a new CLC or an early childhood learning center. That's how we allocate funds to those purposes. But if it's not brought to us, we can't do it. And there is, to that end, one of the things on the memo is a testing center, which is something we've never discussed as a board. So that idea has never been brought back to us in a public meeting, and it is something that was identified as a need. So I think repooling those ideas and continuing to ensure that we hear them from the school level rather than like only what may or may not filter to the top is the other missing piece there. Just to make sure that SCTs are involved in the feedback of what pool of ideas comes to us in that way.
And when we gave you the original pool of ideas, we also said, we think these things can be met in our current buildings, which was true of like the professional development and testing and things like that. So those things could be part of the facilities needs assessment too, or the board can decide what to do next, looking at all the requests that you'll get from schools about what they want. And you can decide as a board about what you'd like to do next with those. So it sounds like the best approach would be to survey principals and teachers, particularly asking SCTs to weigh in, and then to ask Isaac to put together a long-term facilities assessment that would look particularly at aging issues. Is that right? Or are you trying to get at, because we have a 5-year plan that kind of looks at what expenditures would be in the long run that way? Is that of interest too? Is it more just the state of the current buildings?
I want to see if Ashley, because I think that was directed at.
Yeah, to anybody, but I think Ashley's thought through that.
I was going to say that I'm open to hearing what other people have to say. I think that it's a little bit of all of those things. Like if there's a 5-year plan, I don't know that we've discussed it. Or if we determined that a testing center could be in our current buildings, we don't have a plan where one is. So I think there's just a lot more discussion that needs to happen. And the only thing I would add about asking teachers and principals for feedback is something I'd shared about a really open-ended prompt. The reason why I suggest to start with SCTs before broadly surveying is, as you've rightly pointed out, some options will be brought up that are not possible to achieve for one reason or another. And then it's important the question we ask people in terms of like ranking realistic options gives us information that we can use. So I think starting conversationally and using those dialogues to create a survey will actually give us the most usable information. But beyond that, you know, I'm open to hearing what others have to add.
Thank you, Amanda.
And I'm trying to hear what everybody's saying and like respectfully consider it all. The thing that I spent time on was going back and revisiting our G5 policy. So it basically says the immediate district need, figuring out if that's, which we've identified Riley for an immediate need. And then reading into it, we're going stagnant. So the next step is determining site eligibility for repurposing or surplus. And so repurposing is similar to what happened with the CTC Center, or is happening with the CTC Center. And so that step, the first step in there is the feasibility study. And the step after that is, what are we gonna do from here? It doesn't automatically read that we have to sell when we complete the feasibility study. It brings extra information to the table that we can determine if we're going to keep the property or if we're going to sell or whatever it is. At least we have more information to work on. So my recommendation would be proceed with the feasibility study. You know, we can wrap in some of these other pieces, but I will emphasize that, and it is valid information to bring to the board, but I know elementary school buildings that have classrooms sitting empty. So to presume that when we're in a declining enrollment and after we close 4 elementary buildings, we still have buildings with empty classrooms, to think that selling property may not make sense is a little odd to me, but I am not negating that it is useful to bring in all this information. So, but I'll still circle back. The G5 says next step is feasibility study. So at minimum, we should be moving ahead with that, and then we can add on these other asks in conjunction to it, but we should be following our G5.
Let me make sure that nobody else, does anybody else want to speak in this first round? Okay, so we'll start round 2. Annie, you're up.
So is it possible to get like a real estate assessment concurrent to getting
I think
the
so.
information so
I
that we
think
can
we
weigh
can do that.
both options?
It will take us a little bit to find somebody to do the work for us. We probably have to put out an RFP, so it'll take some time to develop that. I know Alan has worked with Tyler to start looking at our policy and how that policy shapes into an RFP and things. So it'll take us some time, and then I imagine it would take some time to get that information together. So that would be, I don't know how, I've never done this before, so I don't know how long that would take. But it would probably be months.
Yeah, so that's why I'm wondering if we would start that process now, knowing that it will take a while to get.
The only thing is if you wanted to designate one of the schools for something, then we would take it out of the feasibility study. And maybe that's the only piece that would affect the feasibility study, is if the board said, well, let's keep another property for district use right now. But if somebody has some ideas on timing, that'd be great.
Ashley?
I think there's a lot of other information that could be shared with board members, specifically, again, new and relatively new board members, that kind of how this process works is not a mystery, because past iterations of this board have opted to keep property, knowing the consequences of selling property. Like the current Rollentall High School is like one example of a property of ours that we've sold, or like Garfield Elementary. And so I think we actually would owe ourselves the favor of revisiting exactly what we've done before and some of the consequences of selling property for one-time money as compared to the long-term benefits of retaining property. The other thing that we've talked about is how other districts do manage when they opt not to have district use. So like in Granite, our past interim superintendent, Martin Bates, would talk about examples where if the building did not have a purpose, they collaborated with the county, who had first right of refusal in their district, whereas in ours, it's the city, because we're contiguous with city boundaries, and worked to make green space and parks, things that the community desired. And so I think that there's, before moving forward on a feasibility study, when we don't know what we may or may not do with specific buildings, I think the simultaneous piece that is really valuable, that could be done immediately, is compile the past information about our practices to help people understand the pros and cons of a sale that results in one-time money that can be used in a really finite number of ways versus the long-term benefits of property values overall. And I think we have many past examples of that would be very valuable to our decision-making.
Thanks, Ashley. Dr. Grant, I'm hearing the conversation, and I'm particularly, Amanda, your point about following our process through policy, which we're stewards of, right? And Ashley, the suggestions that you're making as well are really important. And I'm wondering if it would be appropriate for us to have Ms. Kindle kind of help us outline some of our next steps and where we're at and what we're obligated to be doing relative to our policy with this particular process. Because I think Amanda raises a very good point that some of what we've done over the last couple of years, particularly with G5, well, the decisions we've had to make have been super, super stressful and hard. Huge air quotes was successful because we followed our steps through the administrative procedures and our policy. Not to negate what's been done in the past, Ashley, but I don't want to put us in a position where we are not following what this board has committed to do relative to our G5 policy.
So on page 5 of the policy, and there's a link to it through the memo if you're on there, the first thing we do is the immediate district need. So once that's been done, which we've done, number 1 under immediate district needs says, once you've decided to close a building, you'll determine if there's an immediate district need, and then it says you're gonna talk about it in public meeting and bring it back and get some feedback, which we did. So we did step A1. So there is no other direction in the policy that gets you to step just B, on determining site eligibility for repurposing or surplus. So that is, and I think Board Member Anderson brought up a good point. So all our sense of what that would be the huge data collection piece, which would include things like parks too, because that's a legitimate use of the property that we'd want to bring to the board. You all know that we've mentioned before that people are saying you ought to use this for housing, right? There's a housing crunch in Salt Lake. That people have pressed for, you need to make it for family housing, because we have an interest in having kids here in the district. That there's even the possibility of doing teacher housing or staff housing that would be subsidized in a way to encourage, and especially since it turns out you have to be earning between $160,000 and $180,000 a year as a family to afford the medium-priced home in Salt Lake. So those are all the sorts of things we'd want to gather and start bringing to the board. We'd also imagined bringing to the board some experts themselves to talk to you. I know that Steve Waldrop, who's the governor's property fellow, really has worked in housing issues and can bring different ideas to the board just to present the information to you it is a big decision, and I want you to have the information you need. So some of that was included in our conception of what this feasibility study would bring to you. It also has built into it community input into those, so that each community around those schools could speak to what they want to see happen, and we'd bring that to the board. So all of those pieces are open. The policy itself, though, unless, Ms. Kindle, you have another version of things or want to correct my language or my interpretation of G5, really doesn't say, once we've made that immediate district need, anything to transition into the next step. There isn't it just says, the next thing we'll do is do the study to bring you more information. But the board can direct on it. I mean, we want to follow these steps since they're in our policy, as Board President Salazar said, but I think we can do some other information gathering along with that.
I think my timer had a little time left,
Yes.
but it was left on.
Yeah.
So
You've got
I would just use my last little bit of remaining time,
Actually,
if that's
let me-
possible. I think one of the concerns as we look at following the steps is we're also obligated to follow the directives given in meetings. And those directives have numerous times asked for a comprehensive needs assessment and a facilities assessment as related items. And so I think we do owe it to ourselves to follow the directives we set forth in meetings and not set those as oppositional to what the policy objectives are. But additionally, I think some of the things that are presented in this memo as initial needs have not been addressed to move to item B. So for example, before the meeting, I asked about the testing center and PD, and those are currently housed at Mary W. Jackson and Riley. And in the response, I was told that as the CTC is anticipated to move to Riley, we further anticipate having to use our SLIC site for many of those activities. But this is something that would need to come back to the board, given that the SLIC site's currently being used by students, but also that it doesn't have accessible parking for testing spaces or professional development, because we only have that very limited lot. So this is just one example where immediate district needs have not actually been fully addressed and discussed, or we would have, either permanent things happening in those buildings like we did with Riley, or we would have fields as was originally proposed, or we would be ready to move on. But part of the reason we are not ready to move on is we haven't fulfilled some of these obligations, and we have outstanding work to do about some of the needs that even are listed in the memo, beyond what the SCTs may raise. So that's just one more thing I wanted to clarify, that it's not an opposition to policy, but it's directives have been given in numerous meetings about these topics.
I think we're saying the same thing, because if we follow the policy, we're going to get to, after feasibility study, it's either surplus or site repurposing. And we've taken care of immediate known needs, like the CTC discussion, the athletic fields. I'm not aware of any other urgent immediate needs, but the feasibility study brings in another piece. And site repurposing specifically says in D1, a recommendation to repurpose a site will feature a land use plan. And that can be found on regulatory, yada, yada. The land use plans are intended to ensure that we have repurposed the site, continues to serve as a community asset while offering value, on and on. So we're still accomplishing this by just moving forward with the feasibility study and doing these additional things. I don't think we're skipping past these concerns. They're very valid and very important, but we can also be doing this as well. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever, the majority decides, but I don't think that we're ignoring any needs while we're still moving ahead, because we can get to site repurposing, which is still looking at it as a retention and repurposing.
Thanks, Amanda. And just to kind of go back to the original prompt, right, that you gave us, Dr. Grant, in opening this discussion, is just seeking clarification on where we're at, and particularly with Amanda and Annie and Ashley, the 3 A's. That's pretty cool. We have feasibility, appreciation, depreciation of properties, we have needs assessment and understanding that, and then of course, following our policy and doing some things simultaneously. Do you feel like, Dr. Grant, you have the clarification that you needed to be able to move forward?
No, I would like actually something much clearer from the board. In terms of, we've had suggestions, but I don't think I've been given direction. So this question of what's a directive and what's an opinion held by a few that want something done, I'd like to clarify. I think we should be really clear on that, particularly on this step, so that the board as a whole gives the superintendent direction about what to do next. I think that's important because I think that's important. This is too important not to have some clarity on it, I think.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
We have a motion.
I'll make a motion that we move forward with the next step in the G5 and begin the procurement process to select a partner to conduct a feasibility study for each unused site. And the same time, we identify,
Oh,
sorry,
Amanda, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
we move it to the action agenda. Thank you.
So you, can you restate your motion, please?
Make a motion to move to the next step in the G5 and begin the procurement process to select a partner to conduct a feasibility study for each unused site and move it to the action agenda. Did I just say that right again or wrong again? To move to the action agenda.
What if it was something like move property use and district needs to the action agenda, and we can pick up the conversation there again?
I said that.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion?
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yes.
Ashley?
I would just argue that we have not talked about two of the items listed in the memo as immediate district needs, and they do not currently have a space to be that we have designated for them. So it would actually be out of step with our policy to proceed without doing what we said, and I would also remain very concerned that we are not following past board direction for a comprehensive needs assessment, which has actually been very clearly directed by at least 6 board members over the last 2 years.
So when we presented the immediate district needs in April, we did list the testing and professional development center, and the discussion then was that our recommendation was not to hold a building site available for that because we believed we had other options within the district, particularly with the building of new high schools that will allow for different kinds of spaces for testing, our professional development needs. We've got to, and then the question of using the CTC is still viable for those things, and you're right, we'd have to look at the question of parking, so we haven't solved that completely. But I don't know that the policy says we need to solve immediate district needs or things that come to the fore. We actually thought as district staff that we could address those needs in a different way than setting aside a building. The other one was, which was the other one we're missing on that? You mentioned 2, that there were 2 that weren't discussed.
I said testing and professional development, and I think part of the concern, I would just ask then, as we move this forward, that we also attach this email response to the minutes for reference, that we do have buildings being used for these purposes and proposals of where they could move in the future, but we haven't discussed those in an open public meeting. So I'd be very uncomfortable that we haven't fulfilled item A before moving to item B.
You want my email to be on the minutes?
Yeah.
My response to you?
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and take a roll call vote, starting with Annie Romano.
Yay, Annie Romano.
Works.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Amanda Longley, yes.
Bryce Williams, no.
May I ask a question?
I think we gotta take a vote.
We gotta,
Ask
okay.
your question, yeah.
Oh, whether it's going to action. Charlotte Fife Jefferson abstain.
Ashley Anderson, no.
Was that a no? Okay. Nate Salazar, yes. So we'll pick this back up on action. And we're here in the action agenda. The first item on our agenda in action is our committee assignments, and I will entertain a motion very similarly to what was stated in the previous motion to move it to action. Okay.
I move that we approve board committee reconfiguration, which includes board member Williams going to the finance subcommittee and Annie Romano joining the policy subcommittee, as well as traffic and transportation and wellness committees.
I'll second.
We got a motion and a second on the table. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote starting with Vice President Jensen.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Amanda Longo, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Charlotte Fife Jefferson, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Annie Romano, yes.
All right, that motion passes. The next item is our property line adjustment. And again, just being sensitive to the significance of this, we do have a preferred language for a motion of approval.
I can make that. I move that the board approve the boundary adjustment interlocal agreement between the board and Salt Lake County as currently attached to this agenda.
I second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote starting with board member Longwell.
Amanda Longo, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Charlotte Fife Jefferson, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Annie Romano, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
All right, that motion passes. Our next is the one we just visited, which is our property use and district needs.
So for clarity, we're gonna do the motion and then we'll discuss.
Correct.
Before we make our votes.
Correct.
Okay. I make a motion to move forward with the G5 process and obtain a feasibility study on the remaining unused properties.
Is there a second to the motion?
I second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. We'll open it up for discussion. Ashley?
I want to just provide one more G5 concern about this, which is that when we introduce the idea that the SLIC site needs to be used for the immediate district needs, it calls into question our current closure process for studying innovations, because we are now proposing potential uses of a site that is currently used by students. So I think, again, continuing to proceed here is actually a pretty dangerous precedent to set.
We're not proposing using the innovation site. We actually were proposing using the CTC site
Thank you, Dr. Grant.
for testing and professional development.
Right, am I allowed to speak?
Yeah, ma'am, yes.
So-
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'll ask it. I'll go ahead.
I was just gonna say, then, it would be good to clarify what sites we're doing, and I might need to amend that motion, but it would be my innovations in the CTE are not currently part of this because they are not unused currently. So they are still being, the CTC center is moving to Riley, so the current CTC center is not currently unused. So that would not be part of the feasibility study because it's not unused. We have Benyon, Mary W. Jackson, and Hawthorne are our current unused elementaries.
Point of information.
Yes.
This is why I'm asking for this response to also be attached, because this is actually about current district needs which have been ascribed to Riley and Mary W. Jackson being articulated that they should move in favor of something that we haven't discussed. So I think actually we're really in the weeds here if we don't know what spaces we're talking about, exactly why we're talking about them, and it's why a big picture comprehensive needs assessment has been asked for over and over again. So recognizing that I'm only one person, I just continue to think if we have to go through the weeds to get to the meat of the motion, we don't know exactly what we're doing, and that's not a great place to be in.
Thank you, Ashley. Ann?
Can I ask a clarifying question? In the previous public meetings, was it discussed that where a potential professional development site and testing center were?
The professional development site, it was proposed being at the CTE Innovations, if that freed up.
We actually, I think, spoke in more general terms about it, because the vote hadn't happened with CTE, so we weren't planning on that, but rather we had other options in the district for this. So our answer to the district was we did not need one of the 3 schools for professional development and testing. That was the conversation we had around the immediate district need conversation when we first had it. Where that then is placed depends on a number of things over the coming years. We're even looking at a continued decrease in enrollment, which would lead to a discussion with the board about another possible closure in the future, which we're trying to prepare our community for, that would be something ahead because the numbers continue to decline. So there are a lot of big questions like that to take into consideration.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So, understanding that it wasn't explicit in the public meeting regarding the professional development and testing needs, is it based on policy G5? I've read through it several times, but just for clarification, does that public meeting need to occur before the feasibility study begins, or can it be concurrent with the feasibility study?
Ms. Kendall, can we get a read from you possibly?
From here?
Probably not.
I just think that that order is really important to this motion. So knowing whether they can be concurrent or not.
Could I potentially have the question restated?
Yeah, so in policy G5, it outlines in A to do immediate district need, and then it says, in an open public meeting, the superintendent will recommend to the board that a building be used to address an identified district need, and the board will have public comment, receive public feedback, and then in B, it says determining site eligibility for repurposing or surplus, and that includes the REA and FEA feasibility analysis. So my question is, in this, I guess this is a two-part question. I'll try to be fast. Okay, so in this it says, in an open public board meeting, the superintendent will recommend to the board that a building be used to address an identified district need. So we're talking about the identified district need that have not been addressed of the professional development center and the testing site. And basically, it has been stated that those can be met with our existing properties. So does that mean that we still need to have it addressed in a public meeting with feedback if it's not going to be used in one of our empty buildings? Sorry, does that?
So let me give an explanation and hopefully it'll answer your question. So my understanding of the process, how it's worked so far, is that the superintendent identified an immediate district need for a CTE center. And that was after consultation and much study with district leadership and feedback from the different departments. And so she came to the board with that immediate district need. Is that correct, Superintendent? You're, like, based on your recollection, that for the 4 buildings, she identified an immediate district need of the CTE center. And that
We listed 4 immediate district needs.
Right.
And we said that one could be fulfilled by building the athletic fields. We thought we might use some of that space, but we solved it in other ways.
Right.
So the one district need that was identified by the superintendent that was going to be used for a building, one of the unused elementary school buildings that went forward, was the CTE building. So
Point of information, we are continuing to have PD at Riley and Mary W. Jackson house testing, and those are unused buildings. So actually, the needs just have never been discussed in public, but they have been assigned to unused buildings. And now they are potentially being reassigned to currently used buildings in ways we also have not discussed. So just to offer the information, we are using the two items not in current schools, but in unused properties.
Okay.
So I think it's very confusing, is what
I understand
the information
that.
adding.
I'm just saying, for the entire use of a building, out of the 4 elementary school buildings that are unused, where we currently are with the process is that the superintendent has identified that Riley could serve the immediate district need of a CTE center, and that was what we went through the whole process about receiving community input on. So the 3 buildings that are currently have not been identified in a public board meeting to serve as a complete building to be used for an immediate district need are the remaining 3 of Hawthorne, Benyon, and Mary W. Jackson. So the administrative procedures, based on my understanding of how they work, is that if one of those buildings has not been identified and gone through the process in A to be used and voted on to serve an immediate district need, then they would go through the feasibility study. So, because we haven't identified that any of those 3 buildings that are currently unused, the superintendent hasn't said, I want to use Hawthorne for this immediate district need, or I haven't used Benyon for this, I want to use Benyon for this immediate district need. Those are the 3 that we would be looking at pursuant to the procedures to have a feasibility study on.
Okay, the
does-
follow-up question is it possible that it is possible to receive public feedback and have a subsequent public meeting regarding the partial usage of Mary W. Jackson for professional development and testing needs while simultaneously moving forward with a feasibility study of REA and FEA? Could they concurrently occur, or is it
So how, if you read the first part of B, it says if a building hasn't been identified for an immediate district need. So it is a consecutive process. So if the superintendent were to decide and make a recommendation to the board that she wanted to use a portion of a building for something, then we would have community input on that, and she could make that recommendation and the board could move forward with that. And then for the remainder of that portion, we could do a feasibility and REA study. But to the best of my knowledge, she hasn't identified another one of those 3 buildings to be used for that purpose and come forward with an official recommendation.
okay, thank you for the clarification.
Does that make sense? Superintendent, is that accurate?
Yes, and the reason we're using Mary W. Jackson is it was available, not that we are choosing to assign testing there for all time. So that, right, and we've put people in different temporary spaces. In fact, we're gonna limit the testing at Mary W. Jackson in this next year because we need to use some of that space as a site to house a lot of the material for the building of the high schools that we can buy now at a cheaper price than we can buy later. And between our warehouse at Beardsley and some space at Mary W. Jackson, which has an easy loading, unloading opportunity for us, we'd want to house some of the tiles and things we might buy now there. So we're constantly thinking about using the sites we have now well so that they're kept up. But I have not requested because my team has not requested that we use those sites for testing or PD.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. Thank you, Ms. Kendall. Any further discussion? We still have a motion on the table. Moving into round two. Ashley?
I'm a little bit more confused than when we started because now we actually have another proposed need for Mary W. Jackson, which we won't receive public comment on. And the need for storing items there would be very durational given the nature of the rebuild. So I remain confused that also the needs were identified for testing and professional development in the memo as immediate district needs that could not be fulfilled by the requirements. So I'm starting this conversation about the motion more confused than when it began, because actually as we've gone on, more needs have been introduced. And I would think the community of Mary W. Jackson would also have input into the site being used for building staging as compared to any other use. But I'm additionally confused about why we would engage in a feasibility study about a property that we have a multi-year use for, given the rebuild is going to be at least a 5-year process. So our estimates would no longer be as valuable as they were in another 5 years. So again, it's not about trying to be hasty, it's about trying to fulfill things in the order that we do them, and knowing that, you know, the wheels of bureaucracy turn slowly in part so that community members like neighbors of Mary W. Jackson are able to hear about the potential use of their building in a way that's not like this, but that does follow what happens in G5. So just to add, I'm more confused than when we began, and I think we owe it to the community to have a much more deliberate discussion about this.
Any other thoughts or comments from board members? Amanda?
So what I heard out of what Christina Kendall had said was that the Superintendent Grant has not come forward and asked for a site to be a designated purpose, which is different than just using it because it's not being used, one. And then two, and this could be an area that information could be fleshed out, when these schools were closed, there was a lot of conversation about placing certain programs like special education at Hawthorne and wherever else and other places so that it would deter vandalism and other elements. So that wasn't necessarily an intention for a long-term need. It was to stave off other issues while we're going through this process. So I just want to make sure that those were clarified.
Thank you, Amanda. Any other comments from board members?
I guess I would just,
Annie and then Charlotte.
yeah, I would just say, I guess it kind of depends on our definition of repurposing of a site, and what that means and for what duration. Because I think throughout the district, if I'm hearing correctly, and in the past in the district, sites have been repurposed for short-term needs, but that does not necessarily mean it's going to be repurposed long-term. And I guess my question is, how are we interpreting G5? I'm interpreting it as a long-term usage, repurposing. But it sounds kind of like Board Member Anderson and Board Member Williams are concerned that these are going to be longer term than we anticipated, and this could be seen as repurposing without public, an open public meeting.
I was going to say something very similar. So it sounds like it's about, yeah, we have to define if it's if 5 years or the,
So
do you have anything to say about that?
yeah, I mean, Isaac's worked with his team to say we need a lot of square feet if we're gonna start amassing some building material for the schools. That doesn't mean it needs to be at Jackson. It's easier for us to use that building because it's an easier in and out. It also doesn't need to stay there for 5 years, right? We also have a warehouse, so different things can be put in different places as they're used. We could find other sites. We're just using it because it's available, in the same way that we're using some of the schools for professional development because it's available. We used Mary W. Jackson for testing because it's available. not because it's an immediate district need that we were bringing forward for board review and public comment input on it. If the board wants to change that interpretation, they can. I mean, you're in charge of the policy, so looking at that. But, and again, I think it's important to state the district's interest is in bringing good information to the board. Our only interest on a timeline and trying to be efficient about this is that it costs money to keep these buildings up. We continue to house people in them because we want to keep them up. We continue to get neighborhood feedback about what are you doing and when. And so our interest was in trying to help you move the conversation forward. Outside of that, we actually don't have an interest from district staff on this beyond the immediate district need that we've already named. So we're trying to work in good faith on this, but be clear about what's needed in this and getting direction from the board about exactly what our, because I want you to see us as gathering the data you need to make this decision. They're consequential decisions. So then you tell us what you need.
Thanks, Dr. Bryce?
Yeah, so I understand the need for some of the staging and things of that nature. I'm not opposed to that. I think the motion at hand that I do have opposition to is that around what Board Member Anderson asked for, something that I would ask for as well, and I know we do this collectively. It's not one or two people making this decision. And I'm trying to remember the terminology you use, the facility, the comprehensive needs assessment. I think that is something that is highly important, something that I would like to see. Again, there are 7 people voting on this. It's not about moving forward with G5, it's about the piece that Board Member Anderson said.
Thank you, Bryce. Brian, did you have any comments on this topic? And if not, that's okay too.
The thing that ran out was me. Because I always, when I'm talking, that's where I lose it. But, okay. I really do think that it's important that we are really considering the policy. And as I listen to this back and forth, what we have here to me is a catch-22. The district is being conscientious in trying to use facilities, whether it's to ensure that there isn't vandalism like Amanda's talking about, but also to just be resourceful in running the district. I mean, we've got these buildings sitting there, so it's, okay, we haven't received directive from the board, so we're going to, in the day-to-day operate, I'm looking at this also as a day-to-day operation of the school. And my understanding of my role as a board member is I'm not trying to second guess the day-to-day operation of the school. If the school district needs to do some testing, and we've got Backman, well, not Backman, Mary Jackson or Benyon, okay, yeah. And we think, okay, well, let's use that. It's sitting there. To me, that is not a long-term purpose or a long-term need. It's the district trying to fulfill their day-to-day operations. So what we end up kind of chasing our tail here is, okay, as Board Member Romano was trying to discern, what is long-term, what is short-term. To me, I think that we can go down this process and look at the feasibility and still be considering these other needs.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to go ahead and call for a vote. We moved our way back to the top of
I gotta
our
turn it off.
precinct order here. So roll call vote starting with Board Member Williams.
Bryce Williams, no.
Charlotte Fife Jefferson, yes.
Ashley Anderson, no.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Annie Romano, yes.
Ryan Jensen, yes.
Amanda Longo, yes.
Great. Thank you. That motion passes. And I do just want to be clear that we can still direct the superintendent on the comprehensive needs assessment. I don't know if we can tackle that tonight. I know we're running short of time.
Point of order, we have directed that several times.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. Nonetheless, I just want to say that we can do that more formally, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that. We will now move ahead in our agenda
So
to.
we will move forward with the comprehensive needs assessment as described tonight. Is that right?
Yes.
The direction that we would like to thumbs up give.
May I offer a suggestion for, I think the clarity piece is like we've done on these last two formal requests for board meeting reports, is sending a list of what you're seeking out of that comprehensive assessment so we don't continue this confusion piece.
Perhaps we could help by sending our understanding of the list and it could be edited by the board.
That would be awesome.
Great.
Okay, perfect. So moving on to superintendent report.
Okay. Change gears. At the beginning of the school year, and I just sent a note to the board about this, we had the opportunity, because of some nice research done by our evaluation team on our English language learners. And I shared with the board some of the slides that I had shared with teachers at the beginning of the year, because I think it's important for our district to take credit for the quality of teaching that has led to so many students learning English and transitioning out of English language development status. We just got from the state board a list of all of the districts who had performed exceptionally in serving English language learners and the growth we're getting out of them, including a very fancy USBE certificate on student achievement toward English proficiency. It's a certificate of achievement to the Salt Lake City School District for that performance. We're in the top 5 in the state for how well we serve our English language learners. And it's both because of those who directly serve English language learners in English language development classes, as well as teachers who are working on academic discourse in their general ed classes too with those students. So hurrah to the team led by Dr. Hall and Dr. Maloof. And I believe it's Dr. Ike. Is it Dr. Ike? Yeah. Not yet. Nearly Dr. Ike. And to our teachers for just the work they're doing in the classrooms to advance the achievement of our English learners. So great stuff.
Thank you, Dr. Grant.
You're welcome. Oh, yeah, that's it now.
And B.A. Kearsley just texted me and said that he does not have a BA report this evening. So thank you, Alan, from the remote world. We'll start with Charlotte, board member reports.
I just wanted to report that I have, I attended the West High Open House to see the designs from, the renderings from the architects. And I know we're getting further along in this process of rebuilding our schools, but I want to make sure that we remember that we compile and keep in mind all of the stakeholders' comments that we've received at these input meetings. I know we can't, like I said before, we can't fulfill every wish or everything, but to have it in record somewhere, and to refer to it, and because this is, you know, I think we need to be good stewards of our taxpayers' money. We need to make sure these designs are be responsive to our community. So, I mean, we want to make we want to keep families and attract families and to our district, and so it's important to really listen. But I also think that we need to be thinking about the future of these buildings and how long, I mean, in the future, what is our world going to be looking like? And is it going to be hotter? Do we need more? Wow, that's the first time I've ever gone over that. Oh, anyway. And then hearing the students' voice, I also went to Highland High School, hearing about the art that they wanted to keep, and hearing about community gardens, or like school gardens on campus. That just leads to a better quality of student life, those things. And I think all of those things should be not just forgotten in the shuffle and madness of everyday work.
Thanks. Annie?
Yeah, just briefly, I also attended the West and Highland High School open houses to see the new designs. Was very impressed with the integration of the sustainability piece, and also the inclusion and accessibility for all students to learn. So I'm very optimistic about that. I plan to visit, since you may have already visited some sites that have similar layouts. I have not, so I'm planning to visit Deseret Peak, if anyone wants to join me, and to see that pod learning in action, because there were quite a few questions about that from people who were at the meetings. Sorry, I'm getting tired. So I would like to be able to see it so that I can address those concerns for the constituents. Also attended the Innovations Closure meeting, which is within the precinct that I represent, and will continue to do more research as that is an impending decision. Thanks.
Okay, first I need to apologize as the timekeeper. I guess I've got to learn to do two things at the same time, or just not talk. So anyway, I just wanted to report on 3 of my assignments, okay, to you. As we were just looking at the committee assignments, I am on the SLEF, Salt Lake Education Foundation. I met with my team because I have been assigned to the clinics, the health clinics at Highland and West in the rebuilds. We met on September 4th with James and with Rick Davis and a couple of other members that are on that subcommittee, and talked about moving forward with the health plans for West. West has this wonderful program, but it's still going to be directed by Dr. Jeff Robinson, who was so instrumental from the University of Utah. And so, there's excitement there, even though we're going to be building a new one after we had this, it was a success. So, okay, that's the first one. Then I'm also on the city council or city rep council meeting along with Ashley and Nate, and we were there on September 5th, and they can report on their part, but what I was trying to take the opportunity with the mayor and council members was to explain that there was some concern from constituents in my precinct about the roundabout that is being suggested or planned for with the Highland rebuild at 21st South and 17th East. There are many that are concerned about how do you get children across that intersection when you've got a roundabout. And so there's been some follow-up reporting going on with that, and I'll try and keep you apprised of that.
Okay.
And then finally, USBA, I'm not the person, but this is Lawmaker Month in the classroom, and I just really do want to encourage we as board members, if we know legislators that we could invite to come to our classrooms. This is a wonderful opportunity to show the Salt Lake City schools to our legislators and also have them recognize the challenges that we're facing. And then I'm going to the regional meeting tomorrow. That's it for, I did go to my back to schools for all my 5 elementaries. And the thing that I want to say there that was really wonderful, those teachers were incredibly prepared. But the parents, it's amazing the support that those parents give in PTAs and PTOs and other organizations that are there supporting our schools. Thank you, teachers and parents.
Thanks, Brian. Thoughts?
I also had the opportunity to go to the West High rebuild presentation, and both I and my fellow students really appreciated the opportunity to connect with the architects directly and ask some details about the rebuild. Even if it'll be completed after our time there, it was helpful to be able to get some direct contact with the folks who are planning out the minutia of that process. And then also I had the opportunity to talk with Ms. Ruiz about the upcoming Portrait of a Graduate, and that was a great conversation. I think we're making some progress.
Thank you, Fox. Ashley?
I have a lot, but I'm going to say it fast. It's National Arts and Education Week, so I want to celebrate Tanner Dance, which serves many schools in my precinct, Youth Theater, which specifically works at Wasatch, and our BTS Arts and District Music faculty and the POPS programs that serve every elementary school in the district. I also wanted to acknowledge that our secondary schools also have very successful arts programs and point out that in CTE, many, if not most, of our highest enrollments are in the arts courses that also receive CTE credits, specifically photography. I would really encourage the district, as we celebrate this week of fine arts, to considering offering enough sections of those arts and CTE courses to fulfill student demand and ensure that our developing, or growing, I should say, CTE program responds to the profound connection that the arts provide to youth. I also wanted to provide an update from the Salt Lake County Parks and Rec Advisory Board meeting where we discussed their strategic plan. Feedback was additionally provided on how to encourage students to sign up for the My County Rec Pass. I've brought this up before. I shared our district's model of registration where we support students in connecting with the public library and the UTA. And this may be a model where they can support more kids in accessing rec centers at some point in the future. I also wanted to remind the board that I've been attending all of the monthly USBA policy webinars, and the last one was really a doozy because they reviewed 5 model policies in 30 minutes that were newly required by the legislature. While it'd be great to see any of you on the webinar, I know that time doesn't work for everybody, but they are all posted on the USBA website, so people who've missed them or wanted to catch up, especially our policy subcommittee members, might be interested. In other board business, I did attend the information meeting about the potential closure of Innovations, as well as the West High Open House for the rebuild. And in both of those meetings, I really do feel like there continues to be a tussle between the public perception of events and the district response to those events. And I think many parents at Innovations feel unheard and misled, and many of my neighbors on 200 West unfortunately feel the same. And I think it really behooves us as a group to consider why there is so frequently such a big difference in understanding between community members and district staff about the events that have taken place at their school. I think it's really easy to be reactive and tell community members what they've misunderstood or why we think they are wrong about the events that have occurred, but I think we should instead try to consider how we can solve the problems faced by constituents and build mutual understanding. The last note is that I spent Saturday at the Avenue Street Fair, where I heard from a number of community members, many of whom were excited about the building plans for West, celebrated many vendors to our students, and I heard 2 items of feedback. One, I already passed on to Sam. Some people had reported that our meetings, the audio was very quiet. He says that was fixed. If you can hear this message, you don't need to reach out to me. If you can't hear this message, you won't know to reach out to me, but I will try to find out. The last piece of feedback that I heard was, I've also received this via email and shared it with the superintendent, that our calendaring process for next year is a great process and that it outlines 3 years in advance. But when we don't vote until January of the next year, parents cannot plan for the subsequent school year. As we work to address chronic absenteeism, it'd be really great for families to be able to plan their family events and trips around the school calendar if we can push the dates forward on that moving forward.
Thanks, Ashley. Bryce?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick as well. I also attended the West High rebuild meeting and have received a lot of positive and some not positive feedback, but I appreciate hearing from constituents on these items. I did attend my ad hoc SLEF meeting for the CTE Center. That was on September 2nd, and I know that's the day that Annie was appointed, so we didn't have a chance for a board member report then, but that was a great meeting. I forgot one other thing I was going to say, but that's fine. The last thing I was going to say is I did have the wonderful opportunity to attend my 20-year high school reunion from West High School on Saturday, and it was a really great reminder of all the great experiences that I had as a student here in the district and the great things that are coming forward. So I just wanted to share that as well. Thank you.
Amanda?
Ditto what a lot of other people said. Coming in last, I feel like I'm just on a repeat and rewind. Attended West High Open House, Highland High Open House, Innovations Info Meeting, planning on attending the USBA Regional tomorrow and the Nibley Park Info Meeting on Thursday. Thank you for the shift on the schedule where it originally conflicted with USBA Regional, so that was really appreciated. It is really exciting to see people shift between apprehension for these rebuilds, and then when they see the graphics and the details and stuff, it's a shift from apprehension to excitement. So finally kind of seeing a lot of that more enthusiastic momentum with the more information coming out there has been great. I wanted to express heartfelt sympathy to with Daryl Knott's passing up at Ensign. So heartfelt sympathy to his family and students and staff, et cetera, that were impacted up there. Loss is never easy. And last thing I wanted to say was just in the wake of the Charlie Kirk murder, just a reminder to students, staff, community, et cetera, that violence is never the go-to solution. So if you're struggling, reach out to somebody and talk through it and work through the concerns that you're having. 'Cause there's always a better solution. Even if it doesn't seem like it, there always is. So please reach out and talk to somebody first. Always.
Thanks, Amanda. I'll be really quick as well. I also attended the city council meeting with Ashley and Brian, Alan, Liz, Dr. Grant, and Yandere. So that was a productive meeting, I felt like. I attended my subcommittee meeting for SLEF on the Glendale track. It was a pretty quick meeting. It was pretty high level, but nonetheless, they are moving forward. They had an open house that I was planning on attending but couldn't because somebody called in sick at work, so I had to stay late. But nonetheless, that is building. There will most likely be a request for folks on that subcommittee to attend meetings with potential donors and in the community and all that type of stuff, and I will certainly keep all of you appraised of when those meetings happen. a really kind of housekeeping thing for you all in my report. October 7th at our next board meeting, we're having a photographer come in to take board member pictures with Annie joining us. So please be ready, you know, in your best, you know, feel like the first day of school in October, but nonetheless, we will have the opportunity for new pictures and a new board, you know, whole board picture. And then later this month, Charlotte, Dr. Grant, and I will be attending the USBA Leadership Academy in southern Utah at Bryce Canyon. That's September 25th through the 27th. So those are the top things that I wanted to share out with you all today. We do have a need for a closed session, and I would entertain a motion. There should be one on your all's tables to make sure we cover both topics.
I move that the board go into closed executive session to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation and the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual, and that the board adjourn immediately upon the conclusion of the closed session.
Second.
I second.
We got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, let's do an all in favor. Please say yes.
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 Yes. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you, everybody.